Wednesday, the 11th of June, will go down in history as the day a treaty agreement was finally reached. Tonight, on this one-hour news special, full coverage and reactions. But first, this was the Chief Minister as he emerged from treaty talks to address the media.
I think today is hugely important. We haven't yet got the legal text of the treaty. That is to come. But we have reached the agreement we needed to reach. And that agreement was necessary for the people of Gibraltar, for the people who live around Gibraltar. But it was also something that we wanted to see because Gibraltar didn't want to leave the European Union in 2016.
We'll have all the latest from Brussels, where our reporters Christine Vasquez and Jonathan Scott have been following all the actions in a day of high stakes. We're live in London for reaction from Westminster. Former chairman of the all-party Gibraltar Group in London, Sir Bob Neill, speaks to us. And live too from both sides of the border. What do residents make of it all? Well, first we go to Brussels. Gibraltar, the UK and the EU have reached a landmark political agreement on the long-awaited post-Brexit treaty, aimed at securing prosperity and a fluid border. The deal, finalised after talks in Brussels, removes all physical checks on people and goods crossing between Gibraltar and Spain, while preserving the integrity of the Schengen area and the EU single market. Dual border checks will now take place at Gibraltar's airport and port, conducted by both Gibraltar and Spanish officials. For airport arrivals, the arrangement will mirror the model used by the French police at London's St Pancras station. The agreement also establishes a bespoke customs model and commits all sides to a clause that sovereignty is unaffected. The deal also paves the way for flights from Gibraltar to EU destinations, and full UK military autonomy in Gibraltar remains intact. Negotiators will now finalise the legal text of the treaty, with ratification expected in the coming months. The deal was announced by Mr Lamy and Mr Picardo at the British Embassy in Brussels this afternoon.
Today we have reached a historic solution that I believe is pragmatic and gives the people of Gibraltar the certainty they need for their sovereignty and their prosperity over the years ahead.
We haven't yet got the legal text of the treaty. That is to come. But we have reached the agreement we needed to reach. And that agreement was necessary for the people of Gibraltar, for the people who live around Gibraltar. But it was also something that we wanted to see because Gibraltar didn't want to leave the European Union in 2016.
The arrangements that I think we have been able to put in place mirror and parallel the sorts of arrangements that you see at St Pancras in London, where you do have French customs officers working alongside and in a second line to UK officers. So that will be the new arrangement in the airport, and what that means effectively is that the complexity, the length and time that it has taken for Spanish workers moving into Gibraltar, and indeed the many people leaving Gibraltar and going into Spain, that is all reduced, that the arrangements for goods are dealt with, and there can be a parallel system and a second line that allows for that Schengen process alongside, of course, the importance of Gibraltar's own customs, immigration and police personnel, as you would expect.
Exactly the same as we announced in 2020, which was a tough negotiation with our Spanish counterparts then, and which we have been able to now elevate to an agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union to deliver that New Year's Eve framework agreement into the treaty that will come, the agreement that will come with the EU. So we wanted to assure the viability of Main Street and our retail sector, and we wanted to add something more, an extra string to the bow of businesses in Gibraltar. Now they have that opportunity to sell into the single market on the same terms as businesses in the single market sell in and through the single market, and I'm very much looking forward to explaining the detail of that to the business community in Gibraltar. You know that I recently sought their views on some of the detail as the negotiation had advanced. We had spoken to them in a committee we called TELAC at the beginning of the negotiation. As we got towards the end of the negotiation, we tested certain aspects of the deal with them as it was being proposed to us, and we came back to the table with that feedback, and I'm very happy to be able to tell you that I will be able to say to them that we fulfilled the feedback that they gave us in terms of concern. We've fulfilled being able to negotiate around those parameters.
Sorry, Foreign Secretary, Chief Minister, I haven't heard detail or whether confirmation that there is a level playing field going both ways.
Yes, absolutely. That's the basis on which the single market works. So in answering your question in the positive, what we're saying is it's a level playing field in both directions in relation to the free movement, fluid movement of goods.
This was always unfinished business. I pay tribute to the work that Lord Cameron led when he was Foreign Secretary to get this deal done, and he kept me briefed in opposition on how it was developing. And I pay tribute also to the Minister for Europe, Stephen Doughty, who did a lot of sherpering of this over the last 10 or 9 months to get this arrangement through. And that's what we've achieved today, a historic arrangement that has the bones of an agreement that will achieve sovereignty and prosperity for the people of Gibraltar. And I'm very pleased that we've been able to succeed in that ambition within the first year of a Labour government.
Fabian Picardo and David Lammy speaking there following the end of meetings in the European capital. Our senior broadcast journalist Jonathan Scott was at that press conference and joins us live from Brussels now. Jonathan, what was the atmosphere like at that press conference?
Well, there was considerable excitement, as you'd expect, but it was a very tightly choreographed press conference organised by the British government at the British Embassy here in Brussels. They didn't want anybody to carry it live, unlike the EU and Spanish side, who did broadcast their press conference live. The British government didn't want us to carry it live, so we couldn't. They also limited the press conference to 1 question per reporter, and also actually refused entry to a number of reporters. So, you know, that nervousness that we spoke of at the beginning of the day, I think, continued into the afternoon and evening as all sides want to control the narrative. What we have are fairly sketchy details of what's been agreed, I think it's fair to say, acknowledged by the Chief Minister, who was very keen to say that for the coming days he will spare no effort in explaining the detail of what's been agreed to the people of Gibraltar. So what we had in the first instance was questions and answers on immigration, on customs, on why Frontex is no longer part of the picture. You'll recall, our viewers will remember, that after the New Year's Eve agreement in 2020, the European Borders and Coast Guard Agency was set to play a role at the Gibraltar airport. No more. That will not happen. So we asked about that. The Chief Minister said that the immigration arrangements are exactly the same as those announced in 2020. He said that he is very proud. Fabian Picardo considers it a huge opportunity now for Gibraltar to sell into the single market, to operate on a level playing field. It'll be a huge opportunity, Mr. Picardo believes, for the Rock and for the nearby Campo. So he confirmed that there would be a level playing field that operates both ways, and Gibraltar businesses will be able to sell into and buy from on the same terms as elsewhere in the single market of almost 500 million people, which he said should open a new era of prosperity. Words that were echoed by the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy. He called it an historic agreement. A number of times, even though sovereignty has been parked, a number of times in the press conference, David Lammy said sovereignty has been preserved, both directly and indirectly critically, this agreement preserves Gibraltar's sovereignty. On immigration, the British Foreign Secretary said that the Schengen checks will mirror those that are carried out by the French officers at London St Pancras. So there will be two sets of checks, one by the Gibraltar authorities, a second set of checks by the Schengen authorities. Now, of course, our viewers will want all the detail as quickly as possible, but the honest truth is that today's announcement is very exciting, but it does leave a lot of unanswered questions, and the Chief Minister alluded to that. He said, look, the legal treaty, the text, when it lands, it'll be a doorstop. It'll be a big document running into hundreds of pages. And he is looking forward to going through all of people's questions, addressing the people of Gibraltar's concerns, but that is going to take weeks and months. Now, as Fabian Picardo left the British Embassy this afternoon, after the press conference, he stayed on with David Lammy and other members, Stephen Doughty, the Europe Minister, and other members of the British negotiating team to discuss, I imagine, what happens next, how this agreement then becomes a treaty in the coming months, how it can be implemented in the future. So after doing that work in the British Embassy, the Chief Minister and his envoy, when they left, GBC had waited for him. He saw that we were there. Even though he was very pressed for time, he was keen to stop to talk to GBC, and Fabian Picardo stressed that immigration at the Gibraltar airport will work in exactly the same way as described in the 2020 New Year's Eve agreement.
It's exactly the same deal we announced in 2020. All of the structure is there. We're just turning the New Year's Eve Framework Agreement into the treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union. We have a mandate to do that. That's what people voted for us to do in the 2023 general election, and that's what we've achieved. All of the issues about where people are going to be, where immigration is going to be done by Gibraltar and by Spanish for the Schengen, all of that is, as we said, exactly in the New Year's Eve Framework Agreement, in what we ended up calling the Schengen Shack. So there's going to be much more work for our Borders and Coast Guard agents. The arrangements in relation to fluidity of goods mean much more work for our customs officers, and it means a level playing field for our companies that have often suffered from the absence of a level playing field, with a much bigger market for them to access. The fluidity of people and the fluidity of goods that we were charged by the people of Gibraltar to achieve.
Now, some of the uncertainty, I think, and nervousness is because that New Year's Eve agreement was never published. When will details be published for this?
It was published by the European Union, who put it on their webpage as part of their decision-making process, and published the letters that had been sent in by the UK ambassador and the Spanish ambassador, which detailed everything that was in there. So that was the process that we pursued for publication. Now all of the granular detail behind every sentence of the New Year's Eve agreement and the way that we've negotiated how that will work is what will be in this treaty. As soon as it's published, people will be able to see all of that detail. We'll be able to give more details in coming days, weeks and months, until everybody can see the consolidated legal text of the agreement, which will enable them to make a full assessment of what an excellent opportunity this is for Gibraltar.
Coming back to us now.
That was Fabian Picardo speaking to you there, Jonathan. Now, it is an exciting day, a day the community's been waiting for a long time. There's lots of detail to digest, but I'd just like to ask, what was the Chief Minister's mood like when you spoke to him? He said he was really looking forward to announcing to the national media that he had an agreement, and he's done just that. So what was he like?
I think he was very excited, very happy, a bit tired, nervous about how people are going to interpret everything that's been agreed, but sort of wired, I think is the word, because he ran out of the British Embassy, ran to speak to us. By the end, when we were saying goodbye, he was running into a moving car because he was so tight for time. I think there's still a lot of work ahead, and I think he's conscious of that. But I said, congratulations, Chief Minister, and he was polite, but sort of, I think, you know, highly energized and moving on to the next thing that he needs to do. There's a lot of work yet to be done on this agreement to turn it into a treaty.
Sounds about right. Jonathan Scott speaking to us live in Brussels there. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, meanwhile, European Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič has described the political agreement as a new chapter in the relationship between the UK and the EU. He confirmed negotiating teams will finalise the full legal text and says he is confident the deal will be ratified in all member states. Speaking at a press conference together with Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez, Mr. Šefčovič said full Schengen checks will be carried out at the Gibraltar airport by Spain, while for the UK, full checks will continue to be carried out as they are today. Mr. Álvarez said the last wall in continental Europe will disappear and the parties could now build on the prosperity of the whole region.
Our shared and overarching objective has been to secure the region's long-term prosperity, particularly by removing all physical barriers, checks and controls on people and goods crossing between Spain and Gibraltar, while preserving the integrity of the Schengen area, the EU single market and the customs union. These agreements benefit everyone and will bring legal certainty and confidence to the people and businesses across the region.
Un acuerdo definitivo entre la Unión Europea con la Comisión y España y la delegación del Reino Unido en relación a Gibraltar. Este acuerdo marca un antes y un después para la estabilidad, la cooperación y el bienestar, creando una zona de prosperidad compartida entre Gibraltar y el campo de Gibraltar, como ha sido nuestro objetivo todo este tiempo.
Let's start. Thanks. Christine Vasquez, Gibraltar Broadcasting Corporation. Mr. Šefčovič, what are the chances that this might not be ratified? How definite an agreement is it?
Thank you very much for your question. I'm absolutely convinced that this agreement will be ratified because it's a good agreement. I think we've been working on it for quite some time, so I think that we really went through every single aspect, every little detail, and we've been working very closely with all our partners. So I believe that we found the best possible response for every challenge which was put on the table over the last couple of years. And I think why I'm convinced that it will be ratified, because it was from the beginning the agreement about the people of the region.
Will Spanish border guards, checking passports, be able to refuse access to a UK citizen for some Schengen example, overstayed their 90 days visa, whatever it might be?
Of course, the European agent, in this case is the Spanish police, will guarantee the full integrity of the Schengen area. And of course, Gibraltar is connected now with the Schengen zone. What this agreement allows is a free movement of people with the guarantees that we all have in the Schengen area.
For the EU, full Schengen checks will be carried out by Spain. For the UK, full Gibraltar checks will continue to be carried out as they are today. And they also agreed arrangements for visas and permits and close cooperation between the police and law enforcement authorities. So I think this is the detail which is very important for this afternoon. And I can reassure you that we've been looking for respecting all the legal frameworks, which are, of course, very important if it comes to the implementation of Schengen. And we've been looking for the new way of cooperation with the UK and Gibraltar authorities, which I believe we found and confirmed this afternoon.
Well, our news editor, Christine Vasquez, followed closely what Mr. Šefčovič and Mr. Álvarez had to say at that press conference. She joins us live now from Brussels. Christine, what a day.
What a day. I must say that when we actually heard that there had been a deal, I almost thought they had misspoken. We've been here so many times before, it hasn't happened. This time they have managed to strike an agreement. And we actually found out from tweets from both men, from Maroš Šefčovič and from José Manuel Álvarez. They were so excited about it, they could not contain that excitement, and the tweets came out even before the press conference, that press conference in quite a small media room here at the European Commission. They described an agreement, and we've heard Jonathan Scott talk about this. I think that this must have been what they spoke about at the meeting, as an historic milestone, which brought down the last European frontier. The EU Commissioner, Maroš Šefčovič, said it brought legal certainty, strengthening the post-Brexit relationship. Interestingly, he said there had been no alternative considering today's realities and challenges. The Spanish Foreign Minister gave a bit more detail, at least on the subjects that had been under discussion. He spoke of formal structures on neighbourly relations that would be there for a very first time. New opportunities for the area, he said, and for the relationship between Spain and the UK. And I think both men thought this was important. We've seen a reset with the EU recently, the UK and the EU, and they think that this was the final box to be ticked, and one that they have now ticked. So the airport opening up to Spanish and EU flights, and as we've heard now again, everyone coming to Gibraltar having to undergo Schengen checks. So exchange of information on security and policing, the environment and waste, a level playing field, fiscal measures, and as we say at the moment, it's just a list. It's an agreement with no details. This needs to be fleshed out in the coming weeks, and we've heard Jonathan Scott saying that the Chief Minister is very willing to do that over the next few days. So a legal text still needs to come, it needs to be ratified, it needs to be signed. You've heard the answer from GBC. The European Commissioner said he did not envisage any problem with that ratification because it was a good agreement that looks after people. But there's one thing that I feel we need to clarify. I know a lot of people were actually expecting a treaty tonight, and that was, we've got as good as we were ever going to get, which was either political consensus between all four parties or an agreement. A treaty, especially in these halls at the European Commission, takes a very long time, so it could take months. It all remains to be seen as well what will happen on the ground. We have heard in the past the Chief Minister tell GBC that once there's an agreement, it's all go. We've heard as well Ms. Alvarez saying he will in the next couple of days be briefing Campo mayors and Andalusian authorities and institutions. For now, a deal has been reached. Today there was a long frontier queue, I'm told, and of course it will take time to filter, and we will have a lot of the critics trying to put in their little grain of sand. The other thing that we are going to have is every side trying to sell the deal to their people. We've got the UK, who's just come out of the whole Chagas deal, and Keir Starmer may have a rough time. We've got Spain, where we've had demonstrations in Madrid over the last week. So everybody will have to try and promote their own side and try to explain it to their own sides. For now, we have agreement, we have a deal. I think the explanations are going to have to come later.
Some interesting points to consider there. Thank you, Christine Vasquez, speaking to us live in Brussels. Well, things were still up in the air this morning following the unannounced arrival of a UK government jet in the middle of the night, fueled widespread speculation about a potential deal announcement. As was eventually confirmed, Foreign Secretary David Lammy was on board, although the Gibraltar leg of his trip was short-lived.
It was the briefest of visits. Britain's Foreign Secretary arrived under cover of night on a UK government jet, landing a little after midnight. By 10 a.m. this morning, he was gone. David Lammy had bigger fish to fry, with Gibraltar just a pit stop on his journey to Brussels, stopping by as he did to pick up Gibraltar's officials. GBC did seize the opportunity of a very narrow window to catch Mr. Lammy as he ventured from the convent to number 6.
Foreign Secretary, good morning. Do you have a message for the people of Gibraltar today?
I'm looking forward to a very good meeting.
Do you have a treaty ready?
We can get to a negotiation deal that is good for the businesses and the people of Gibraltar.
Are you expecting a treaty deal today?
Let's see what happens.
And from number 6, the ministers and their respective entourages made their way directly to the airport, charter flight awaiting. There was just enough time for Mr Lammy to be treated to a quick tour of the Wessex Lounge and airport terminal before he and Mr Picardo shared a moment on the tarmac. With speculation rife that today might finally be the day that a treaty would be announced, this appeared somewhat celebratory. Congratulations, perhaps, on a job well done. At this stage, despite the many rumours swirling, there wasn't yet an agreement, with more work required before any potential announcement could be made. And with that in mind, the Gibraltar UK delegation boarded their flight, set to present a united front in Brussels, as they sat down 9 years after the Brexit referendum for what might just be the very last round of negotiations over a treaty for Gibraltar.
We now turn to London, where the former chairman of the all-party parliamentary group for Gibraltar, Sir Bob Neill, has been following developments closely. He joins us live now from Westminster. Sir Bob, thank you so much for joining us. You've been one of Gibraltar's greatest advocates in Westminster over the years. How does it feel to see this agreement today?
This is very good news. I'm out of Parliament now. I retired, as you know, but I still watch this very closely from afar and keep well in touch with my colleagues and Gibraltar's friends in London. And the principle of this deal is important, and we should all welcome that. We will want to look at the detail, and I'm sure my colleagues in Parliament will want to look at the detail in due course, but this is a really, really important breakthrough for the people of Gibraltar. And the test, I think, that we've always made, Gibraltar's friends in the UK Parliament, has been this, that if there is a deal is available that is acceptable to Gibraltar, its people and its government, that respects their British sovereignty, respects our defence interests and does the right thing for the economy and well-being of the people of Gibraltar, we should stand in the way of it, we should get behind it. And I am sure that my friends and colleagues in Britain will want to do that, because we want Gibraltar to succeed, we want this to work. We obviously want to see the detail, as you do with any treaty, but as you've been saying in your earlier packages, it'll take a time before we see the text. But this political agreement, where all sides have laid it on the line that they want a deal, we will want then, I think, to make sure that our colleagues on the other sides of the border in Spain stand up and stick to their word on this, that the EU sticks to their word, and I know that in Gibraltar you'll make sure that they stick to their word, and we want to work with you to assist you in that.
Well, that's great to hear. I'd like to point out in your last common speech, you said that we owe Gibraltar a good deal. I know, as you mentioned, there is a lot of information to digest still, and you'll have to go through it more closely. But on the surface, is this a good deal for Gibraltar?
On the face of it, it seems to be a sensible and practical solution. To be honest, like a lot of people in Gibraltar, like the majority in Gibraltar, back in the referendum, back in 2016, I would have rather we weren't here. But we've moved on from that now. The UK and the EU have moved on, Gibraltar has moved on. We've got to have something that confronts the realities for Gibraltar now. I think, from what I've seen, this deal can deliver on that, and what we then need to do is to recognise that we must now put that into a proper text and into practical measures as soon as possible. There are templates, as have been talked about before, the way you could juxtapose controls for a Schengen area work at St Pancras in London, for example. That may well be the sort of thing that we're looking at. The Chief Minister referred to the Schengen shed, for example, earlier in one of your pieces. All these things are practical and doable. The one thing I would say is this is the result of hard work over many years, actually. It's been hard work in the UK Parliament over many years to get us to the right place. David Lammy, of course, has been the person there that's been able to close the deal, and well done on that. But I want to pay tribute to previous Foreign Secretaries in the outgoing previous Conservative government, people like James Cleverly, remember, who came privately to Gibraltar, David Cameron, who addressed a National Day on a number of occasions. As Foreign Secretaries, they made a real effort to get this going, and what we've seen now is actually the conclusion of their work. So we've always adopted a cross-party approach to this in British politics. I very much want that to remain the case. And credit to all sides for getting this done, and credit, of course, to everybody in Gibraltar for this too.
Thank you very much, Sir Bob, for speaking to us there. Sir Bob Neal speaking to us live from Westminster. And we'll have more reactions from London in a special 90-minute viewpoint following this bulletin at 9:30. Meanwhile, Spanish Premier Pedro Sánchez has taken to social media to express his satisfaction with the agreement reached in Brussels. He agreed with the statement made by José Manuel Álvarez, stating that today is a great day for the Campo de Gibraltar. Mr. Sánchez says that after 3 centuries of no progress, the EU, UK and Spain have reached a comprehensive agreement for the benefit of citizens without giving up Spain's claims over the isthmus. Well, you're watching GBC News on this political agreement special. Still to come after the break. More reactions live from the studio, from the border, and analysis from our reporters in Brussels. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to GBC News, where we're reporting on an agreement reached for a treaty. I'm joined now by the leader of the opposition, Keith Asupardi. Mr. Asupardi, thank you for joining us. First of all, I'd like to hear your initial response to the news of an agreement today.
Well, I think it's important to dice away the initial reaction, because on the one hand, I think I view it with a cautious welcome, in the sense that until we got to a political declaration, you can't get to a treaty text that is settled. But equally, I think it's important to understand that nothing of substance has emerged today, when there's a lot of hype about there being an agreement, but actually there is no agreement yet. All that there has been is a political declaration, a press release. Now, was that necessary? Yes, but because you need to get beyond the political agreement. But in terms of when people are judging whether it's a good or bad agreement for Gibraltar, there is no agreement of substance that has emerged. And as we keep saying, our position in the GSD is that we want a safe and beneficial agreement. But you cannot make the judgment as to whether something is safe or beneficial until the treaty text emerges. Now, our understanding is that this is going to be some months, that this treaty text could be a few hundred pages. It will contain complex clauses that need to be judged. We've had a political declaration, which is no more than a page and a bit today. There is no way that you can make an assessment as to whether this is safe and beneficial when there's been a political declaration of 1 page, which is 7 pages less than the New Year's Eve agreement, in respect of which we had misgivings. So I think the real point is cautious welcome on the fact that they've passed the hurdle of the political agreement, but until such time as there is a treaty text on the table, there is no way that anyone can judge whether this is safe and beneficial.
I understand that you're not in a place to judge it in its entirety yet, but there are some details that have emerged today. For example, the checks at the airport with Spanish officials being there, etc. Are there any elements that we've heard of so far that you are particularly opposed to or you particularly welcome?
Well, again, I think you've got to extrapolate the New Year's Eve agreement, which is 8 pages long, against this political declaration. Some of the stuff that has emerged in this political declaration can be linked quite easily to the New Year's Eve agreement. Well, it's not the same in one important respect. For example, when you ask me about Spanish checks, that the New Year's Eve agreement mentions Frontex. This political declaration does not, but I don't want to make a judgment. This is what I'm very keen to say, that I'm not jumping to conclusions one way or the other. I'm not getting hyper excited that there's been an agreement, because there hasn't been one, and nor am I in the position of saying
there hasn't been a legal agreement.
There hasn't been a legal agreement, but until there is a legal agreement, there's nothing that is enforceable or against which you can really judge whether it's safe and beneficial. And nor am I was going to say, nor am I in a position where I'm saying there are heinous issues in this political declaration, because I think it's important to temper the reaction today on the basis that there are issues in the political declaration that will cause some people concern. that will cause some people a great deal of enthusiasm. Again, I think until you've got the agreement, you can't make a final judgment.
We'll have to wrap up shortly, but just very quickly before we go, could you just tell us when you found out about today, have you had any involvement with anything that's been going on?
Well, I had a meeting with the Chief Minister yesterday. He gave me a briefing of what they were trying to achieve today in Brussels, the political declaration. I also met the Foreign Secretary this morning, David Lammy and Mr. Doughty with Damon Bolsino and Roy Clinton. We had a 30-minute meeting after he met the Chief Minister and before he left for Brussels.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Leader of the Opposition, Keith Asopardi, speaking to us live there. Well, earlier today, José Manuel Álvarez, Spain's foreign minister, said the last wall in Europe would disappear. This will mean greater frontier fluidity for the 15,000 cross-frontier workers who cross the border every day. Ian Clarence now joins us live from the border.
Thanks, Alina. Yeah, it's a case of here today, not quite gone tomorrow, but the frontier fence is on borrowed time now. It is coming down, and this is new for all of us, for absolutely everyone. It's 40 years since the frontier completely reopened, but it's been here for 116 years. Nobody alive now on the planet, I checked, was here when this frontier fence first came up, and it's part of our identity. It's part of what we feel about ourselves in Gibraltar. It's obviously been a topic of much conversation, certainly a lot of conversations that I've seen in comments on our social media and so on. People are concerned. There is a real concern about what the coming down of this frontier will mean for our security, for our safety, for our children, as many are pointing out. GBC has pointed out, so we showed plans for the fact that of the 1.2 kilometre fence, over a kilometre is staying there. For one reason and another, off to the west over here, we've got the MOD estate, and off to the left, to the east rather, we have, well, MOD estate right at the end, but we've got a car park, we've got the commercial gate. So for one reason and another, most of the border fence as it exists at the moment is staying there. We are losing this area behind me, which is the frontier crossing, where people are queuing up for hours and hours of their days and of their lives. But the concern is there, the concern is real. We're not sure what that means in terms of the lack of frontier checks, and if that will mean increased criminality, will mean people flooding in. That's the concern that people are expressing. People are saying that they do not want this frontier fence to come down. What will it look like in reality? We just don't know. As Mr. Asopardi has just pointed out, a lot of this is still opaque. We're not sure what this will look like in reality and in practicality. So it remains to be seen if there is going to be this flood of criminality, of crime, and of people threatening our way of life, because that's how Gibraltar is viewing it at the moment, at least half. According to our poll, I think it was a 51-49 split over people that wanted the frontier fence to come down and those that didn't want to see it moved an inch. So the divisive decision has been made, but obviously it is part of what we need to do to get that agreement over the line. The benefits will hopefully be clear to see, but there are going to be some costs. And well, we've had reporters from Spanish channels have been gathering on the other side of the border, and I think we're going over now to Kevin Ruiz, our reporter, who's there as well.
Yes, Ian, on this side of the frontier in La Línea, it's been a relatively quiet afternoon and evening on this historic day. Very little frontier traffic. It's been free-flowing. We've seen cross-frontier workers come into La Línea after 5-6 this evening. The chatter, of course, people asking what's happening, what's the latest, people wanting to find out, as has the Spanish national media. Because I say it's been relatively quiet, except for a window of 30 minutes. Just moments ago, Juan Franco has been addressing the Spanish national media, who's descended on La Línea here at the frontier, asking all sorts of questions and collecting impressions and reactions. Of course, they've wanted to know especially what Spanish frontier workers, what cross-border workers are thinking, what their reaction is to this announcement today. And joining us this evening is one of those very familiar faces on Main Street, Jero. She's been working on Main Street for 22 años, Jero.
Para 22 años llevo ya trabajando en Gibraltar. Quiero dar las gracias a todos los que han hecho posible este acuerdo. Llevamos muchos años esperando, tanto para Gibraltar, para el campo de Gibraltar, para la línea, una prosperidad compartida, y ya por fin estamos a las puertas. Y muy contenta, hemos tenido años de espera, ha sido duro porque no sabíamos lo que nos podíamos encontrar en la frontera, los controles, hemos sufrido el tema de la bajada de la libra, en fin, y ahora lo que queremos es eso, que entre todos hagamos de Gibraltar y del campo de Gibraltar todo que sea todo muy bien para...
Sí, Quejero, muchos años esperando, por fin ha conseguido. ¿Te quedas contenta con lo que se ha anunciado hoy?
Me quedo contenta con lo que se ha anunciado hoy, porque yo como trabajadora transfronteriza hemos tenido el miedo del tema de las pensiones y de la seguridad social, de lo que podía ocurrir en un futuro si no hubiera habido un acuerdo. Y gracias, pues lo tenemos ya. Sí, dime.
Temas importantes, las pensiones, que ha sido un tema que ha preocupado mucho a ustedes, los trabajadores. Una de las cosas que se habla con este nuevo acuerdo es la igualdad de condición para esa prosperidad compartida. ¿Te preocupa que quizá con la armonización de precios, esa cercanía de precios, quizá la calle real de Gibraltar, donde tú trabajas, se pueda ver afectada y quizá peligren algunos puestos de trabajo?
Pues precisamente hoy hemos estado hablando los comerciantes y sí. Tenemos ese miedo porque no sabemos el impuesto que nos van a poner ahora en aduana. Si Gibraltar siempre ha sido duty free, comprendemos y entendemos de que van aquí a equilibrar un poco los precios, pero también queremos que Gibraltar siga siendo lo que está haciendo ahora, que quien venga encuentre esa facilidad a la hora de comprar, que los precios estén más o menos equilibrados, pero con respecto a Gibraltar, que no sea algo muy duro. ¿Por qué? Porque puede perjudicar nuestros puestos de trabajo, ya que no va a ser Gibraltar lo que era. Claro. Entonces es el miedo que tenemos.
Y Jero, una cosita más, del dicho al hecho hay un trecho. Hoy se ha anunciado, se ha hecho público este anuncio, este acuerdo, no se ha firmado nada. ¿Temes quizás de que del dicho al hecho hay un trecho y no llegue a firmarse ningún acuerdo?
Pues sí, porque yo todo lo que no había firmado, la verdad es que no, como se dice, de lo que veo me creo la mitad o algo así, ¿no? Entonces lo que quiero es eso, que ya hemos llegado hasta aquí, que no se eche nadie para atrás, que se firme contra más pronto mejor, que tengamos una frontera fluida, que el turista cuando llega a Gibraltar también pueda venir aquí a la línea, se pueda probar todo, lo que es la comida, la bebida, todo, en fin, en general. Y que estoy muy contenta. Que quiero dar las gracias a todos porque sé que ha sido unas negociaciones muy duras y ha sido una buena negociación.
Jero, muchas gracias por tu tiempo. And there you've heard it. Jero, she's a well-known face on Main Street. She's happy about today's announcement. She has her reservations as well. She's worried that nothing's been signed. She's worried how those new taxes could impact on Main Street and perhaps endanger a number of jobs. It remains to be seen. One day at a time, as Jero says.
Thank you, Kevin, speaking to us live from the Spanish side of the border. There's some interesting questions to consider. Well, we turn back to Brussels now, where our team has been gathering their thoughts and analysis of today's events. Christine Vasquez and Jonathan Scott join us once again. Christine, Jonathan, I have to ask, one thing that's dawned on me while I've been seeing some of the tweets is Maros Sefcovic, for example, he says this benefits everyone and reinforces a new chapter in the EU-UK relationship. How much of a motivator do you think it's been, wanting to improve that relationship? We've waited so long for this agreement and finally it's over the line. Do you think it's because of that desire to improve the overall relationship between the two?
Well, that is what they've said. That has been the objective, that objective of shared prosperity and also the certainty. That's something that's been pointed out today. And we just heard Kevin Rees there in La Linea, the certainty that this will provide frontier workers and will provide businesses. They might not like what's in it, but it certainly will give certainty, and there's nothing worse in business than uncertainty.
And I think that while we will need time to digest the details, I'm reminded, and I think we've often heard people refer back to an interview that Sir Peter Caruana gave GBC, where he said there will be a prize, which is freedom of, well, we were referring to it previously as freedom of movement, but mobility, people being able to access the Schengen area, and also for goods to be able to flow freely across the Gibraltar-La Linea border. That's the prize in this arrangement. And what's the price? That, I suppose, might point to the Schengen controls. There will be people who are not fully happy with what happens there, and I don't think a lot of us are fully clear on how those are going to operate, even though the Chief Minister says nothing's changed since the 2020 New Year's Eve agreement on immigration. He says it's exactly as was spelled out there.
And I think the way Maros Šefčovič put it was that for the UK it would be Gibraltar and for the EU it would be Schengen. But it's very clear that if we want to be part of Schengen, that is part of the price. And part of the price is that Spain is the member state for Schengen.
So they have to carry out the controls.
So they have to carry out the controls. And from what we see, they will carry out the controls for everyone.
At the airport, everyone who flies in will have to go through a Gibraltar passport control and a Schengen passport control.
That's right. So, and I think that what they are sort of holding on to is that everybody who comes, who isn't Gibraltarian now, does go through a Schengen control at the border. So instead of doing it at the border, it will be done at the airport. And that is what I think is a reference to it will carry on as it is now. Anybody who comes in now does go through a Schengen control.
So that is true for the 90% plus people who fly in from the UK, who the Chief Minister told us, you know, the vast majority of British visitors to the Rock fly into Gibraltar and then cross the frontier into Spain. He said upwards of 90%. But what about the remainder, the almost 10% who are going to stay in Gibraltar? The situation does change for them.
It does change for them. They will have a double check. They will have to be checked by borders and coast guards, and then they will have to be checked by Schengen. Because of what we were talking earlier, you can't just come into Gibraltar, it can't just be a funnel into the EU.
Yeah.
And I suppose that those people who are worried, and we've heard Ian's report, worried about security, will want that sort of control as well, because what you can't have is anybody wanting to go into the EU using Gibraltar as a vehicle to do that.
Yeah. Very interesting that the Chief Minister said that as well as saying that immigration is exactly as was agreed 5 years ago, he said that the joint operating area where Gibraltar officers and Schengen controls carried out by Spanish officers, that will happen in a joint operating area which is equidistant from Gibraltar and Spain. So in my mind, Gibraltar ends with a line and Spain begins. So that reference to the joint operating space being equidistant from Gibraltar and Spain threw me a bit, and I don't fully understand it.
There are a lot of things that I think we won't understand at the moment and that we will need explaining. But what has cemented for me the fact that there is no Frontex anymore is that we do hear that it will be the same model as St. Pancras. And St. Pancras, we do have that. We have French police in St. Pancras, and I think when we had the whole debate about guns or whether they were going to be armed or not, I'm not 100% sure. I think that the police who are armed in St. Pancras are not visible. I think there is a sort of back room of police, you know, because there has to be sort of intelligence somewhere. I think that's how it works in St. Pancras. We're not sure whether that's where it will work here.
I think there will be many Gibraltarians who will soon become experts in the St. Pancras London model of joint checks. 2 lines, he said. You know, David Lammy repeated a few times, a second line of checks. The Gibraltar authorities are fully respected, he said, but then the Schengen controls have to be carried out by the Schengen member, in which, in St. Pancras it's France, in Gibraltar's case it's Spain. And I think in the coming weeks, this is what's interesting, Chrissy, when we were comparing notes, you covered Šefčovič and Alvarez press conference, I covered Lamy and Fabian Picardo's press conference, and when we were comparing notes, there are different emphases, no? Because for each side, there are specific things which they want people to understand and to stay with. So do you want to go first for Šefčovič and Alvarez? What were they very keen to stress?
Well, they were very keen to stress the historic deal, the fact that it's for the people, that it's for them. But as we said earlier, all these statements have to be seen in the context of what each country is witnessing and experiencing, and they have to go back. Each person has to go back. So Alvarez has to go back after a weekend of sort of demonstrations. We have, you know, that you're going to have to do the same with Keir Starmer from your point of view. So context is important in what they say, and I found that there was very little crowing. Actually, everybody was very careful in the same way as we've been speaking about how tight-lipped everybody was. I found there was very little crowing today.
Okay, so one of the things, yes, that I think the UK wanted to stress was sovereignty. Sovereignty was parked in this negotiation, and David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary, told journalists there has been no impact on sovereignty directly or indirectly. So he was keen to stress that. He was also keen to say that the UK's military autonomy has been maintained in this deal. There were concerns that Schengen checks would be very difficult to reconcile with the free movement of British forces in and out of what is a military airport at the end of the day, but British government said full autonomy of the military has been maintained. For Fabian Picardo, he was very keen to stress that immigration is, as it was agreed 5 years ago. Nothing has changed on that, although I hate to say it, I don't see how that can be so. I think that some things have changed, at least in my understanding of it, and I think in other people's understanding as well. Frontex has gone, for starters. Frontex is no longer there, and as a result, the way that those second checks are going to be carried out needs to be further understood by people.
Both men recorded a video this morning which leads you to believe a bit more that the deal was almost, if not done by this morning when the Foreign Secretary arrived in Gibraltar. So the video is very buoyant, and if you want to say what do they want to put across, there is very much David Lammy telling Fabian Picardo, you are happy, aren't you? You know, this has been with your consent. And I think that is important. It comes after Chagos.
Yes.
And the video is very much very buoyant, walking across the airfield. Hello, mate, aren't we happy?
Yeah, so the people of Gibraltar and their representatives were fully involved in this process. Christine, just to wrap up then, it's difficult maybe to sort of overstate how significant this day could be for Gibraltar going forward. Not just another news day for us, I think it's fair to say. And we were stood before under a banner that said United for the Future. And I think that although there are a lot of nuances and details that we'll need to explore in the coming days, I think we can all agree that everybody has got together for the best interests of people in Gibraltar and the Campo today.
Yes, with all the issues on the table, the four sides have managed to find agreement.
Thank you, Jonathan and Christine, speaking it to us live in Brussels there. Well, that's all from this evening's news special. We've been covering this historic occasion. Gibraltar has a political agreement for its future relationship with the European Union. And stand by for a special 90-minute viewpoint hosted by Rosa Stengo. More reactions, more analysis, more voices. That's coming up right now. We leave you with this summary of the day's events from the team and myself. It's good night.
You have a message for the people of Gibraltar today?
I'm looking forward to a very good meeting.
Do you have a treaty ready?
Get to a negotiation deal that is good for the businesses and the people of Gibraltar.
Big smiles on the faces of both Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Chief Minister Fabian Picardo as they shook hands out on the tarmac before boarding that UK government plane you see behind me, which is destined for Brussels.
There's optimism and hope that this time could be different.
we bring you breaking news. An agreement has been reached between the UK and the EU on the future relationship of Gibraltar.
We all recognize a clear momentum and agreed that the time had come to get the job done.
Este acuerdo marca un antes y un después para la estabilidad, la cooperación y el bienestar, creando una zona de prosperidad compartida.
Well, I'm delighted that today we have reached a historic solution that I believe gives the people of Gibraltar the certainty they need for their sovereignty and their prosperity.
But we have reached the agreement we needed to reach. We are part of the continent of Europe. We need to have the fluidity of goods and people. It opens up a huge opportunity for the future of Gibraltar and the whole region, and to look forward to a positive relationship with Spain. The hugely important aspect to this is not just the business aspect, it's the human aspect.
June 2025 will go down in history. A political agreement is reached on Gibraltar's future relationship with the EU. On tonight's special viewpoint, we get reactions and analysis to today's news. Good evening and thank you for joining me on tonight's Viewpoint. Today's much anticipated historic announcement of an agreement between the UK, the EU, Spain and Gibraltar is the culmination of years of intensive and highly complex negotiations. But it's a political agreement on the key principles underpinning a future treaty. The core issues are the removal of the physical barriers at the frontier, checks and controls on persons and goods between Spain and Gibraltar. This will have an enormous impact on the mobility of goods and people, but how much can we deduce from what we've learned so far today? On Viewpoint today, we're going to get the reactions and analysis of the former Chief Minister, Sir Peter Caruana. We'll also be hearing from representatives of the Gibraltar Federation of Small Businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, the Cross Frontier Group and also Unite the Union. We'll be crossing live to La Linea, where the Mayor, Juan Franco, will be speaking to us, and we'll also be heading over to Westminster, where we'll be hearing from Lord Ricketts, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And we'll also be hearing from some members of Gibraltar's youth, because of course it's their future too. But first of all, let's head over to our news editor, Christine Vasquez, who's had a very, very long day in Brussels. Good evening, Christine. Hi there. OK, can you tell us, Christine...
Good evening, Roz.
Can you tell us, this agreement has been years in the making, but has it delivered today what we expected?
Yes, it has. And I know that a lot of people were expecting more, but this was what we were expecting. So I always say the first time we came here, when we were expecting some sort of deal, we were told they hadn't quite reached political consensus. Those were the words I was expecting today. We have reached political consensus. So basically, the four sides have managed to agree on everything. But yes, we do need to go towards a treaty text. Yes, it does need to be ratified. And as we've heard Maros Šefčovič tell me at that press conference, he doesn't think there's a problem in ratification because it's a good agreement. And yes, it does have to be signed.
He says it's a good agreement, but of course that is a matter of opinion. That won't be everybody's opinion, will it? But do you have any sense as to how long it will take for this legal text to be agreed? And can you just take us through a little bit of the process that we can expect in the coming weeks and months?
We have no idea how long it can take. We just know that in European institutions, it does take quite a while. We don't know where we're at either at the moment? Could it be because we have spoken about translations needing to be done? So if translations need to be done, then is there a text already? So we don't know at this stage where we're at. So we could be halfway there for all we know. And they have managed to sort of just call agreement now, but they have more or less been already translating. That is something that we're going to have to find out in coming days where we're at. I said earlier that we have heard in the past the Chief Minister say that once there was agreement, it would be all go. So can we see things happening on the ground already? We just have to wait and see.
Christine Vasquez, thank you very much. It's been a very long day. Hopefully you can go and grab yourself a glass of wine and some Meunier as well. Enjoy. Well, that was Christine Vasquez in Brussels. It has been a very long day for them. What do you think of today's outcome? If you have an opinion, email me, viewpoint@gbc.gi. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think. I'm joined now by the former Chief Minister, Sir Peter Caruana. An honour to have you and a pleasure to have you also here. Sir Peter, I know I don't get you very often, so I'm going to make the most of you tonight, if you don't mind, and pick your brain. First of all, tell us, what do you make of this agreement?
I think these are the way things are done in the EU. You strike a political agreement first, you agree the principles, you bottom out the political difficulties that underpin the technical issues, and then you get technicians to do the drafting of the text. I think that I agree with Christine's assessment that this is the most that could have been expected today. Everyone knew that there wasn't a text ready. That was not what they were after today. If it is true that they have indeed reached political agreement on the resolution of the handful of thorny issues that were left at the end of the negotiations, then that is very good news indeed. And of course, we will all form our view about what we think of the agreement and the extent to which we support it or oppose it or like it or dislike it when we've seen the text. But in principle, Gibraltar wants and needs things out of this agreement and has to be willing to give things in order to obtain them. I once used the price comparison that I see has been used earlier this evening on Newswatch, and that's exactly what it's all going to boil down to. What things do you think we have given away to obtain the things that we want? I think, look, it's inevitable that there will be many things in this agreement that we will not like. The question is, why don't we like them? I've got my views clear about how I will assess this agreement. If I don't like things because they give away any degree of sovereignty, jurisdiction or control over Gibraltar's internal governance to Spain, or give Spain any foothold or any say in the conduct of our internal affairs, in other words, any constitutional sovereignty jurisdiction, then we will not like it, and the people of Gibraltar, I think, will not back it. But if what there is in it that I don't like are things that don't affect those three important issues, but are just things that we just don't like, and there will be a lot of those, but do no harm to the safety of our future, to the distance that we maintain from Spain in terms of our future and our Britishness and our self-governance and our sovereignty. If they don't impact on that, then we've got to be big enough as a community to be willing to overcome our emotional dislikes, think with our heads, pocket the benefits on which our children's future depends, and if that's the sort of deal that the Chief Minister brings back, then it will be a good day for Gibraltar.
Sir Peter, how secure is a political agreement? Because, of course, you were Chief Minister that led on the Acuerdo agreement, which was also a political agreement, and that fell apart. Do you think that there are still pitfalls ahead before a legal text will be ratified, agreed and ratified?
This is wholly different to the Acuerdo agreement. The Acuerdo agreements were never, ever more than a political agreement. It was a bunch of politicians getting together, agreeing things with no legal basis, no legal status, just agreeing to deal with each other in a certain way. This is not a political agreement of that sort. This is not a political agreement that stays as a political agreement. This is a political agreement in the sense that the politicians that needed to resolve the political basis for technical solutions, is it acceptable politically to the government of Gibraltar for this particular technical issue to be resolved in this way? Yes or no? Is it politically acceptable to Spain that it should be resolved, to the EU and to the United Kingdom? It's a political agreement in that sense, in that it resolves political issues so that the technical people can convert that political agreement into a legal treaty text. And that is what now needs to be. It would be completely shocking, and I don't think the EU operates like this, for having reached political agreement for this not to be converted now into a text. Of course, it could unravel in the text.
Well, as it emerged in the Brussels Agreement when there was a misinterpretation on the issue of sovereignty.
Yes. Remember, this is a treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Neither the government of Gibraltar nor the government of Spain are parties to that treaty. The EU operates in a certain way, and the United Kingdom operates in a certain way, and the EU is unlikely to lightly allow disagreements of that sort to be sprung on the British and Gibraltar sides. But it could happen. There could be, when they come to... look, a lot of technical work has been done already. There isn't a text, but there will have been a lot of technical discussions about how particular issues are going to be dealt with at a technical level, and it's just now a question of putting it into words. Theoretically, it could unravel. I do not expect that it will unravel. I think it's going to take a bit of time, but I don't think it's going to unravel.
Well, you talked about, you just touched on there, on some potential challenges that lie ahead. The goodwill is there, but it could unravel, you say, in some particular areas. Can you just give us a broad overview now of what potential challenges do lie ahead and what the process is now for ratification?
Well, look, I don't know what's in the treaty. I know some issues that have been problematic, and I've heard some things about how the discussion was going, about how they might be resolved. So, like every person in Gibraltar, I will judge this treaty when I see the text. In the meantime, I trust the political leadership of Gibraltar not to give away any part of the family silver. And I think the people of Gibraltar will take the same view. I think we all agree in Gibraltar, sovereignty, jurisdiction and control, no. Other things we can get to live with. The problem will be in wordsmithing some of this to make sure that it stays politically safe. That's the challenge now. But look, the EU does this all the time, convert political agreements into technical written agreements.
This one is particularly sensitive, and so I want to ask you whether it will have to be ratified at the European Parliament or at the Commission, because we know that there are right-wing factions in the Parliament.
It has to be ratified by the European Parliament.
Could that be a problem for us?
Honestly, I think this, because it is an agreement between the UK and the EU and the UK are both very interested in resetting their relationship. And now with the security situation as it is around the world and in Europe in particular, and generally, I think the EU wants to get this done. And Spain, I don't think Spanish members of Parliament of the right wing or any other wing simply will not have, in my assessment, could be wrong, hope I'm not, but will not have the political clout to prevent this agreement from being ratified by the Parliament. But it does need ratification, yes.
So, Peter, let me just ask you on some of the text of what we've seen today, which really is very similar to the framework agreement that was published in December 2020. The line that there will be dual Gibraltar and Schengen border checks at Gibraltar port and airport, what do you understand that to mean? Can you just give us, will there be... There's no mention of Frontex. Will there be any boots on the ground, do you interpret?
I don't expect that there will be any boots in the ground in Gibraltar exercising any form of sovereignty or any other executive jurisdiction in Gibraltar. I don't think the government would have agreed to that. But look, what I think it means is that the EU is not willing to allow the Gibraltar authorities to be the gatekeeper of its external border. In other words, that once somebody gets in to Gibraltar, They can go all the way to Poland and to Berlin, and therefore there is going to be a dual control where Gibraltar authorities will admit people into Gibraltar.
Residents?
Well, no, will admit everybody into Gibraltar, and an EU official, which may well be a Spanish official exercising an EU function, will give them clearance to enter Schengen territory, not to enter.
So forgive me, just to drill down on that. So for example, I fly to Gibraltar after a holiday in the UK. Would I have to go through both Gibraltar and Schengen checks as a Gibraltar resident? What's your understanding?
I don't know, but I would expect the answer to your question to be yes, because you will be returning to the Schengen territory. You won't be returning just to Gibraltar. You've got to think anybody arriving in Gibraltar is arriving in France and in Italy and in Germany and in Spain and
But the language is Gibraltar is connected to the Schengen territory. Am I making too much of that?
I think you are, because this is an association agreement. This is to treat Gibraltar as if it were in Schengen without it actually being in Schengen, which means that once you're admitted into Gibraltar, you're admitted into the whole Schengen area. And the EU, not irrationally, will want to ensure that an EU member state, and in this case, logically Spain, because they are the ones who operate the external border that is relevant, is going to have to give clearance. The issue here, Ross, is not whether a Spanish official or a Frontex official is giving EU access into Schengen, not into Gibraltar, into Schengen, but the basis on which they're entitled to say yes or no. Now, we know, I think it's out there in public, that they will not be able, anybody who's a resident of Gibraltar, they will not be able to say no to. Anybody else that is not a resident of Gibraltar, my understanding, but this is a sort of
the Telegraph are leading on it today.
This is a sort of detail where the devil can reside that I will want to see and scrutinise carefully. My understanding is that the Spanish authorities or the Schengen authorities, exercised by a Spanish official if necessary, will only be able to deny entry to somebody who's on the EU-wide security list. The CIS list, as it's called.
Right, so it won't be...
the sort of person that would be denied access into Rome if they arrived on a flight into Rome airport. Not the exercise of individual discretion by Spain, let alone by a Spanish official on duty at the border. Either Peter Caruana and Ross Astengo know because we're residents, but if some non-resident of Gibraltar arrives in Gibraltar, is his name or her name on the list, on the EU no-go list, yes or no?
Okay, so it won't be someone having a bad day at the frontier who decides,
my understanding of it is that
difficult.
these are the sorts of issues that need to be assessed, is that it's a checking, not a permission.
Interesting question from Melody, who says, well, what if Spain doesn't comply with the agreement, that, perhaps silly things start happening? How is that controlled? How is it monitored? What is the process then to...
If Spanish officials who are exercising on behalf of the EU an EU function places the EU in breach of its legal treaty obligations with the UK, then the EU as a responsible body will see to it, I expect, and the UK will demand, that the EU complies with the EU. Now, this is not Spain, remember. This is the EU that is assuming these legal obligations towards the people of Gibraltar and to the UK. And we've got to assume, at least until the contrary is proved, it is shown that they're good for their word. And if they're not good for their word, then we can tear up the treaty and walk away from it, I suppose, at some point in the future. Indeed, the termination provisions are one of the things that I'm very particularly interested in looking at, to make sure that we do have an escape clause.
I understand it's a very hefty document. Perhaps 1,000 pages, but that's only the rumour mill. Be a lot to read when it does get published. I want to ask you whether a political agreement means that certain changes can start going ahead, or do we have to wait for it all to be completely ratified and signed off before, for example, the frontier will start to look different and other elements of the agreement?
I think before anything can happen as a matter of legal right and obligation, we have to wait until the legal process is over, which means until the treaty is signed and then ratified by all the parties that need to ratify it, including the EU Parliament. But it would be inconceivable that Spain, and for that matter the Gibraltar authorities, should not from tomorrow morning onwards start behaving in a way that is consistent with the fact that they have resolved the political issues which were an obstacle to a possible treaty being reached. So I would expect to find the current broadly favourable frontier regime, there are off days, I have to say, but broadly favourable frontier regime to continue.
So, Peter, final question. How have you received personally the news that the skies may now open up to European flights? You had a vision of a very large airport many years ago, and you were severely criticised for the size. Do you feel today you're justified in building that airport?
Well, I've been criticised for a lot of things that are coming home to roost now, not least my policy of dialogue with Spain, and indeed the new airport terminal, which I'm very glad to hear is a central piece of the new agreement and the ability for it to work. Look, my view is that the people of Gibraltar are right to wait to form a judgment until they see the details of this treaty. When they see it, they should assess it with their minds and not with their emotions, and they should not forget that there is a prize and a price. You know, we can cling on to our historical hang-ups and our fears, justified as they have been. We have very good reason to mistrust Spain. We can cling on to those and pay the price that comes with it, or we can have confidence in our political leaders, have confidence in the EU as an institution and that we say we wanted to stay in, and have confidence in the UK government and in their respect for international legal obligations, and understand that this agreement will safely, if it does, if we all look at it and think that it's safe for Gibraltar, but if we come to that conclusion, that it safely delivers for Gibraltar things that will be important to the economic success. What does economic success mean? Because when politicians talk about the economy, it seems very remote to lots of people. Economic need means that our future generations, our children and our grandchildren, will enjoy the same high standard of living that the current generation has enjoyed and a previous generation has enjoyed, and we do not condemn them to live in a small town at the end of La Linea, which is what the alternative could look like.
So, Peter, thank you very much for all your insight. Let me just ask you very quickly, have you been called upon to give the government any advice at all over these negotiations, or have you not been involved at all?
No, look, the government would not seek my advice. They have, from time to time, individual isolated issues have been put to me for my opinions about what I think, whether I've got any ideas about how they can resolve, but the government doesn't need my advice.
So, Peter, I hope that you will return to us when more detail is forthcoming so that you can give us further analysis on what the text means and transmit that to us. But thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you very much. Well, joining us now, thank you, Sir Peter, joining us now in London, let's gauge the reaction from our representative in London. It's Dominic Searle. He's in Westminster. Hello, Dominic. Joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Dominic, can you just tell us, how has this treaty agreement been received in London?
Well, I mean, it's a bit early days. Obviously, there was some early press speculation stories, the Daily Telegraph this morning, which were pretty inaccurate, I guess, and sort of, don't particularly help the cause. But we've got to remember that the whole situation, how did we get here? We got here because of the turmoil, essentially, in British politics, a decade ago almost. And, we knew very clearly when we went to that referendum what we thought. We voted practically everyone the same way. But here it's always going to be a matter of contention. Now, the core issue, I think, for us is that what has been done has been a process that started with several different Conservative foreign secretaries and has been taken on further by David Lammy in a Labour government. And really, the one thing that I am very confident in is that the steer, the direction that the British government has taken all along has been completely in tandem with the Chief Minister and his team.
Dominic, we've seen already some headlines from that right-wing faction. The Telegraph says Britons will now have to show passports to Spanish or EU guards when they land on the Rock. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, has said another surrender and a handover in all but name. Is that really a view on the right, or is that a general consensus? Or are people really not too interested in Gibraltar?
No, I think, it's not a question of being, Priti Patel is very clear, spoken to her a number of times. They understand the situation. But, there are several factions, as we know. The Conservative Party had a difficult time at the last election. The right wing always had its views, and it was, it hasn't helped for us, in particular in the arguments, although Shagos, actually, the legal arguments are good for us. But here, basically, every politician is looking for a cudgel to see if they can get rid of the Labour government because they want to be in government. But I think you'll see tomorrow there'll be a statement in Parliament made by the Labour government, probably by David Lammy, and I would expect the official Conservatives to reply. It doesn't worry me, to be honest, because you've got to, we can't get always torn in the sort of politics of the Spaniards, or indeed sometimes the internal politics of the UK when they're just fighting over power. I think, for most Brits today, I guess the review on spending and budgetary issues have been the dominant ones. But I think overall, the reaction from everybody that's friends of Gibraltar and MPs that like us, which are many, it's very, very supportive, and the ex-governors have all come back very, very, keen to see where we go and very supportive as well.
There's been a lot of scrutiny on the negotiations, Dominic, over the past few years. The European Scrutiny Committee, we've heard, some concerns raised by Sir Bill Cash on some of the elements of what was being talked about. Do you think that same level of scrutiny will still be applied now that the deal is pretty much done? Will they just let us go off and get on with it? Or do you think that there'll be still a great deal of scrutiny of the actual legal text when it's ready?
No, I think that the text will be scrutinised by everyone. We've just had Sir Peter Caruana speaking there. He'll do it, and so will many people. I think the issue is the quality of what comes out at the end in the treaty. But you've got to remember one thing. When you're looking at it from the position of someone like Bill Cash, they see everything as a foot in, a sort of toe in Europe again. It's nothing to do with Spain, the historic issue of Spain and Gibraltar. It's really more to do with their obsession, if you like, with the Brexit, which obviously, everyone has a different assessment of how it's worked. But I think certainly, we've taken a very important decision in going down the talks that we have been. I think, being honest, I think we were forced into a path which reached a fork by the Brexit outcome. And I think if we'd taken, if there hadn't been a deal today, we would have probably been going in a loop back for 10 years to try and get back exactly where we actually are today. So I think, I don't think we should take too much about the criticism from certain people, but we have to understand that the EU, Europe, politics broader, is now much bigger than it even was when all this started.
Dominic, given you have put in such a huge amount of work over these years in the UK, speaking to politicians, lobbying for Gibraltar, and given that you are soon to be retiring from your role as representative for Gibraltar in London, I'd like to give you a moment of reflection on just how difficult and perhaps rewarding as well the past few years have been, and perhaps a sense of relief that you might now be feeling.
Well, it's a difficult question in one sense. I think when you've got a journalistic background, the more turmoil there is, the more interesting and exciting it is. So I've got to say it's been very interesting and very exciting at times. I think sometimes the varied quality of politics, the fast-moving politics, if you like, in terms of not so much, day-to-day stories, but the fact that people, how many foreign secretaries have we had? Every time somebody moves out, you've got to start again, you've got to try and build a relationship. And the one thing I think that's reasserted here, because obviously there is a lot more movement than in our politics in Gibraltar, is that people really count. It counts for people to see the rock itself, to understand what the border is, how the people really feel in Gib. everybody that goes to Gib, in my experience, including Bill Cash, by the way, gets a strong feel for it and understands that there's a real passion there for our being British. And I think, you know, we have a lot of support here. But yeah, my time has been interesting, controversial. And by the way, I think, you know, even when we get to the end of this, and I think we will, it's just the start of the continuity of real politics. We'll all have to think about the future of politics. How do we protect what we get? And if this is as good as we feel it is, then we'll have to protect it even more and make sure that, you know, it doesn't lead us to any wrong paths.
Absolutely true. It's by no means the end. It's the beginning, really, of a new journey. But thank you very much, Dominic, for joining us this evening. And I hope now that you are going to be retiring, you'll be joining me more often on my Viewpoint panels. Thanks very much.
I'm glad to.
Well, jobs and workers are the engine of our economy, and they are at the core of this agreement. So what do they think? Joining me now are representatives of those sectors. We have John Easeler from the Chamber of Commerce, Owen Smith from the Gibraltar Federation of Small Businesses, Darren Serisola, who is the president of the GGCA Union, but also of the Cross Frontier Group, and we also have Christian Duer from Unite the Union. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. It's been very difficult over the years trying to sort of eke out opinions when we haven't known the detail. Today, there has been some detail. I'd just like to touch on your general thoughts of what we've heard today. John?
I think it's very positive because in the context of the alternative, which would have been I think catastrophic for our economy and for businesses, this is very good news. Clearly, there's not a lot of detail in relation to how it may affect businesses, but clearly, you know, frontier fluidity for people is super important for the business community. In respect of goods, there's not a lot of detail, so we can't really say to what extent people or businesses trading in goods are going to face headwinds. I think the positive thing is that I understand that it will be a transaction tax on importation as opposed to a VAT or a sales tax. We don't know the rate.
Well, the figure bandied about has been 17%. Hasn't it?
But that's not confirmed.
It's not confirmed.
And it's not in the details. So clearly, until we know what that rate is going to be, we don't know to what extent the competitive environment of those businesses trading in goods are going to be affected. And clearly, the businesses may face headwinds as a result of that, and we will need to look out for those businesses in particular. But generally, I think it's good for business and it's good for jobs because the alternative would have been catastrophic, in my opinion.
Federation?
Yeah, I think the reaction that we have to this is a sense of relief because we now have clarity on the direction of travel, and it's clear that the direction of travel is towards an agreement, and the political agreement now rules out the alternative, which certainly our members were so very concerned about. And so together with that sense of relief, though, comes an anxious desire to understand the detail, and through that detail to understand precisely how it is going to impact on our members. Because what we've seen today is an agreement that makes clear that the heads that were being discussed and negotiated over the past few years have all been included within the agreement. And now it's a question of the detail.
The cross-frontier workers, how are they feeling tonight?
Positive, happy. I mean, 15,000 people coming into work to Gibraltar. They're going to have that fluidity. And like I said, provide a service to Gibraltar. So I think it's positive in that aspect. There is obviously still the concerns and the anxieties from the other side as well in terms of how is it going to affect, for example, the workers that provide a service at the frontier. So customs, borders and Coast Guard, they're a bit anxious obviously and uncertain in terms of how is it going to affect them, the system at the frontier. Is it going to mean that they're going to lose out in terms of, is it going to affect the working hours that they have? How will that impact their allowances? And so there are still questions that need answering and reassurances to be made. It's good and bad, the feeling in terms of, but positive in general.
What about interactions with other officials? Is that a concern at all?
Sorry?
Interactions with Schengen officials. Would that be a concern at all?
I'd like to think it's a small concern. I mean, we can hold on to the negatives. We can look at negatives, but I think we should look at the positives, really,
Okay.
That's a reality, but I think, like I said, I think that it's positive.
Positive
like,
news.
John was saying.
Yeah.
A no deal is catastrophic. That's a reality.
Yeah.
The Gibraltar that there is nowadays is not the Gibraltar that there was when the frontier was closed, and that's the reality, whether we want to accept it or not.
Yeah. Christian.
In terms of Unite, obviously we need to wait and see what the details, when the details come out. But obviously it's been an eventful day today. Started at 8:30 in the morning, meeting the Foreign Secretary. And the reality is it's been a long time coming, at least to be at the stage that we are today. We will need to see what the final details are. But I would also like to say that Unite's mandate clearly was in terms of the framework agreement. We debated that at the time of the framework agreement, and there was a clear, even though there were members who were against it at the time, there was an overwhelming majority who were in favour of the details that came out on the framework agreement, which was a border that had free-flowing frontier, free-flowing for people and goods, and that there's economic prosperity for Gibraltar. With the reality is that the private sector, and we've got two gentlemen here who represent the private sector, the private sector is the engine of the economy, and that is the reality.
When we spoke at the Federation dinner last night, in fact it was, Owen, you spoke about the importance of collaboration and of understanding and of having the opportunity for a sort of a transition period. So going forward now that we know the direction of travel, what would you like the next step to be? I mean, the legal text hasn't been signed off on yet or completed, but...
I mean, we've had a long period of uncertainty. Now there is less uncertainty because we know we're heading towards an agreement, but there remains a great deal of uncertainty as to the specifics and how it will be implemented. I mean, we can look forward to certain events that will transpire in the next few months. We have in October the introduction of the EES into Europe. That is something that could still impact our border if the treaty has not been finalised by then and implemented by then. So we have to be cautious about the challenges that still remain, but we should have, once the details are published, the ability to, for our members to arrange their affairs so that they can meet the challenges that will no doubt be thrown up by this agreement and the treaty when it comes, and also to exploit the opportunities.
There have been nerves, haven't they? People taking to social media, expressing concerns, security, the level playing field. What does that actually mean? How's that actually going to be achieved? It's, businesses on this side are concerned that they are just not going to be able to compete. Can I just have some of your thoughts on what's being said,
I've expressed concerns about the dangers of levelling the playing field and the balance being tipped the other way. And I think that's something that we need to look out for. On the other hand, the fact that we're going to have a free-flowing border means that we have the potential to attract many, many more people. So hopefully that will make a difference and create opportunities for the future for businesses. And if there are certain lines of business that we're actually active in at the moment that become not interesting enough to continue with, Gibraltarians are very entrepreneurial, and I'm sure that we will find other things to do and grasp those opportunities to make sure that we prosper. I'd just like to say something about our negotiating team and the Chief Minister in particular. I think they've been at this and have been persevering for years, and we've been waiting patiently. I think we have to congratulate them for achieving what I think is a historic agreement. And I have full confidence in our team and in our politicians in securing what is in the best interests of the community and for the business community as a whole.
Unite and the GGCA, the Cross Frontier Group, have been in very close contact with what's been happening. You've been briefed. You were briefed this morning by David Lammy, I believe. Were you there?
It wasn't a brief as such. It was basically he asked us what one question is what concerns our members in the particular organisation have. So we made some comments around it.
So obviously, for you, the concerns are still there because you don't know the detail, and the devil is in the detail, right? But for you, in terms of your cross-frontier workers, your workers, what are those concerns? What did you tell David Lammy?
Well, one of the issues I raised was around the military base in Gibraltar. There was a lot of rumours around the military base, and obviously we have a big membership at the MOD and the contractor. Navy assets coming to Gibraltar is an important essence of their job. So that was one of the questions I raised. I did not get any answer, but clearly I've seen some comments from the actual statements made that is protected. So visiting subs, for example, would not be an issue as such. But a lot's been said, and I followed some of the stuff in social media, but I think recently we saw what a no-deal scenario would look like. We saw the rogue National Policía Nacional officer, David Barrero, just taking the interim measures as he wanted, and we saw hours and hours of queues. That is, like Darren said before, is catastrophic for the economy in Gibraltar. And that is what a no-deal Brexit would look like. That is a reality. And that also needs to be said because not enough has been said about what a no-deal Brexit could look like.
And I think as well, I think as well that we also have to look at exactly what Christian is saying. If the deal is rushed, these are the consequences. You'll have these issues arising because it hasn't been properly planned and looked at. So I think that is part and parcel perhaps of why things are being so that we don't have issues and the deal becomes something which is obviously not.
I mean, from the GFSB perspective, we're very keen to ensure that when the detail emerges, it shows that there is a level playing field for everybody that's doing business in Gibraltar and for the ability of Gibraltar businesses to compete on an equal footing outside of Gibraltar as well.
How is that going to be achieved?
Well, there are plenty of methods to achieve that, and we have made representations which set out how we see that end being achieved. And the second part that we want to see is sufficient support for those of our members who find themselves at the sharp end of the wedge, because there are going to be sectors, in the short term at least, that are more adversely affected than others.
Can you say which ones?
Well, I think the obvious ones for most people can easily identify that retail is going to be exposed, wholesalers are going to be exposed, and those are the areas that we think may need a bit more care and attention. But I think we need to treat the detail with caution because, there are always unintended consequences. And Gibraltar is a small business, has a small business landscape. Each sector is intimately connected with the next, and we must be cautious in the way that the success or the failure of different sectors may in turn infect others.
And very important that for workers, because I mean, if businesses fail, it is going to impact
I was raised
employment.
In our last meeting in the UK at cross-frontier level. It was exactly that, We say, look, there's going to be businesses that are going to suffer. And we wanted to know how they're going to be supported, what's going to be done to
And, well, how are they? What's been said?
Well, I think that's something that when we know the detail and we see how the competitive environment of those sectors is going to be affected, we will need to take that up with the government. But ironically, those sectors, the vast majority of people working in those sectors are actually cross-frontier workers. So in the context of shared prosperity, I think it's ironic that if those sectors are affected, cross-frontier workers could find that their jobs are maybe on the line. So I think, but the Chamber would like to, I don't know whether you know, but the Chamber, I think you do know, that in 2013 we commissioned an impact study of the relationship between the two economies, and that showed the extent to which the Gibraltar economy was contributing to the region and so on. We want to carry out that study again as soon as possible, because I think it's very important to take a picture of where we are at today, so that in a few years' time we can repeat it and measure sector by sector and with the two economies how things have evolved over that period of time, because I think it's very important to be able to measure the effects of this and how it delivers for us and how it delivers for the other side.
Yes, well, that's what I want to ask you very quickly before we go. I want to ask you, we do focus a lot on the cross-frontier workers, the vast majority of which come into Gibraltar, so obviously great news for them. But the idea of shared prosperity is a two-way thing. So do you think we will be able to benefit from what the Campo can offer businesses here in Gibraltar, or do you think that's a bit of a pipe dream?
I think there's some obvious sectors that are going to benefit. And I think right now the focus for our members is the immediate future and not necessarily the long-term future. It would be good to see the detail on this treaty delivered quickly. As I mentioned, there are some challenges that are in the pipeline. We have seen in recent months that the UK enter into a number of high-level agreements with the detail to follow. And Gibraltar has already been negotiating for years. So we would hope that we don't fall into a pattern of high-level agreement followed by months and months of detailed negotiation again, and that we see the text quickly, and that we avoid, to the extent that is possible, any of the sort of border-type challenges that might emerge because of the existing timeline for implementation of stricter Schengen controls on external countries.
Well, that's a really good summing up of where we are at the moment. Thank you. We're going to have to leave it here. Thank you very much for coming in. There is going to be a lot to be talking about over the next few months as more and more information emerges. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Now, stay with us for part 2 of Viewpoint, when we'll be hearing from property developer Greg Butcher. We'll be heading over very quickly to La Línea Mayor Juan Franco, who'll be speaking to us. Also, the chair of the House of Lords Foreign Affairs Committee, Lord Ricketts, and I'll also be joined by some of Gibraltar's youth to see what they make of today's announcement. Join me in just a few moments. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me on this special Viewpoint on this very historic day when an agreement, a political agreement, has been reached on Gibraltar's future relationship with the EU. Now, someone who has been keen for the treaty to get over the line is the La Línea Mayor Juan Franco. He's been very vocal on the need for a cross-border deal that addresses frontier fluidity, which is fundamental to the livelihood of 15,000 cross-frontier workers and the wider Campo region. I spoke to him last night at the GFSD dinner when he said he felt a deal was imminent, and he was right. So how is he feeling right now? Our reporter Kevin Ruiz is in La Línea.
Yes, Ros, whilst Gibraltar is making the headlines tonight, La Línea is watching closely, perhaps with a number of questions as well. Joining us now is the Mayor of La Línea, Juan Franco. As you rightly say, Juan Franco ha sido muy vocal, ha estado muy involucrado en el tema del tratado, de estas conversaciones, abogando porque La Línea tuviese su voz. Hoy por fin vemos luz al final del túnel, ¿o no? ¿Cómo reacciona? ¿Cuáles son tus primeras impresiones? ¿Cómo valora este comunicado de intención de tener un acuerdo?
Buenas noches, lo primero. Hombre, contento, no eufórico, pero sí que el principal problema que teníamos, que era era sobre todo que los trabajadores residentes en La Línea puedan pasar por aquí libremente y que los gibraltareños residentes en Gibraltar puedan venir también libremente a nuestra ciudad. Pues ese primer objetivo parece que se ha conseguido. Evidentemente no va a ser de hoy para mañana, habrá que firmar correspondiente acuerdo y después llevar a cabo los trámites pertinentes, pero la verdad que por ahí satisfecho y contento. Después, por otro lado, Sí que hay cuestiones que se han anunciado un poco de forma genérica. Se habla de creación de un fondo para posibles infraestructuras, también que se va a atender la situación de los trabajadores y sus pensiones, también temas ambientales, o sea, cuestiones que estaban sobre la mesa y se están planteando posibles soluciones. La parte en la que estoy intranquilo, entiendo que cualquiera, es ver eso que ya se ha acordado, después cómo va a ir al detalle, cómo va a afectar al día a día de las personas y en temas que estamos trabajando en nuestra ciudad. Por ejemplo, acabamos de aprobar un plan de ordenación urbana donde esto, pues es una frontera, ¿verdad? Con esto que vamos a hacer. Son muchos metros cuadrados, nosotros como ayuntamiento pues nos interesaría. También qué pasará con el precio de la vivienda, porque cabe una posibilidad de que el precio acabe incrementándose, pero bueno, los problemas los analizamos otro día, hoy vamos a quedarnos con lo bueno.
Pero dato importante, dice que primer objetivo tenía una larga lista, hemos hablado muchas veces, larga lista, también tenía un número de ayudas que no llegaban, un listín de cositas que quería que se tuviesen en consideración a la hora de un tratado. ¿Se ha escuchado en la línea?
Bueno, para nosotros lo más importante es que temas que eran vitales han entrado en la agenda. Ya nada más que con eso me doy por satisfecho y ahora hay que ver cómo se va a ir desarrollando cada cuestión. Lo más importante para mí de verdad era el tránsito por aquí, eso se ha conseguido, por poner un símil, estamos al borde del precipicio y parece que nos hemos salvado. Ahora vamos a ver cómo nos salvamos, ¿no? Que hay formas y formas. Yo lo que siempre se ha hablado de la prosperidad compartida, espero que se convierta en una realidad y sobre todo que se nos iguale algo, pero que nosotros nos asemejemos más a Gibraltar y no Gibraltar que se asemeje a datos que no son buenos en nuestro lado de la frontera, ¿no? Estoy seguro que hay buena voluntad, estoy seguro que es el momento de que se nos escuche. El próximo viernes, sin ir más lejos, vamos a Madrid y seguiremos reivindicando pues, el trato que creo que nos merecemos y seguir avanzando en cuestiones que creo que son de mutuo interés, porque yo estoy seguro que Gibraltar querrá también que la línea pues salga adelante y tenga parte de esa prosperidad sin detrimento de la que ya tiene Gibraltar, al revés. Ojalá Gibraltar crezca todavía mucho más y nosotros de la mano también.
Supongo uno de los temas que te da tranquilidad es ese assurance de que los trabajadores, con el tema de las pensiones...
Un tema fundamental que en otras ocasiones no se hablaba y sí que tengo que destacar que con este ministro es un tema que siempre ha estado en la agenda y además con un grado de conocimiento importante. La cuestión entiendo que es un tema con una complejidad técnica importante y evidentemente tendrán que intervenir pues técnicos del gobierno de Gibraltar, técnicos del gobierno de España, posiblemente también técnicos del gobierno británico. Espero que se nos escuche y que se vaya buscando una solución que sea la mejor para todos.
Lleva muchos años pidiendo que la voz de la línea esté presente, que se oiga la línea. Nunca tuvo presencia en esas conversaciones, en esas negociaciones que hoy han llegado a su fin, o al menos esta etapa. Entramos en una nueva etapa. ¿Cómo de involucrar tiene que estar la línea en estas conversaciones? Quizás sea necesaria la creación de algún foro transfronterizo o algo por el estilo, para que la línea tenga presencia en ese foro.
Nosotros, pese a, como tú has apuntado, las escasas posibilidades que hemos tenido, creo que es más que nos hemos movido, es imposible. Hemos tenido reuniones con el gobierno de Gibraltar, no sé cuántas. Hemos estado con el gobierno de España, con ministros de Exteriores, de Interior, con presidentes de la Junta de Andalucía, con consejeros, con parlamentarios del Parlamento andaluz, con diputados del Congreso, defensores del pueblo. Estuve el martes pasado, sin ir más lejos, con el actual, pero había estado con el anterior y con el defensor del pueblo andaluz. Es decir, hemos estado en Bruselas, nos hemos movido a todos los niveles, habido y por haber. Hemos estado con el tejido empresarial, tanto del lado de Gibraltar como del lado de la línea de España, con sindicatos de los dos sitios. Creo que esa parte la hemos hecho, creo que la hemos hecho bien, hemos llegado hasta donde hemos podido. Ahora, para mí esto es un acicate, me explico. Lejos de decir ya está el trabajo hecho, al revés. Ahora toca todavía poner más carne en el asador y espero que podamos conseguir ese sitio, ya no en las negociaciones, sino en los acuerdos concretos puntuales que habrá que ir matizando, porque estoy seguro que hay cosas que no se están teniendo en cuenta. Por ejemplo, te voy a dar un dato importante. Estoy seguro que tú que eres vecino de Gibraltar, esa carretera la usas. Si tú quieres salir para la Costa del Sol, nada más que cojas por la carretera del cementerio. Esa carretera está completamente congestionada y no da servicio. Ya hemos empezado con las expropiaciones para desdoblar la carretera por la parte de atrás y meter dos vías en dos sentidos.
Se ha confirmado esta semana. ¿Sí?
Para la gente de la línea, pero también para la gente de Gibraltar, porque ahora es como, con todos los matices del mundo, pero es como si nos convirtiéramos en una sola ciudad de 100, 120.000 habitantes y las necesidades muchas son comunes. Así que ahora tendremos que estar de la mano trabajando dentro de la esfera de sus competencias, cada uno haciendo su trabajo. Y como te digo, para nosotros es un acicate para trabajar más duro si cabe.
Esta noche le hemos visto aquí hablando con los medios españoles, todo el mundo preguntando, todo el mundo interesándose por la línea. ¿Se ha interesado el Gobierno Nacional o la Junta de Andalucía por la línea? ¿Ha tenido comunicación con ellos desde este anuncio esta tarde?
Puedo decir que a las 4:30 de la tarde me llegó un mensaje creo que era de Twitter, y automáticamente me estaba sonando el teléfono ya del Ministerio, responsable del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores, para comunicarme, cosa que agradezco muchísimo. A los 15 minutos me estaba llamando un alto cargo, por respeto no voy a dar los nombres, un altísimo cargo de la Junta de Andalucía, y a los 15 minutos estaba hablando con Fabio Picardo. O sea que muy agradecido por tener esa información de primera mano, y como digo, ahora lo que toca es sentarse, pensar las cosas, ver qué nos toca a nosotros hacer, que ahora se abre otra vía de trabajo importante, y el viernes en Madrid a ver qué datos nos dan, y a partir de, el mismo lunes estamos ya
Se viene la reunión en Madrid con el ministro de Asuntos Exteriores, será usted y los demás alcaldes del campo de Gibraltar como la última vez.
Yo digo siempre lo mismo, si tú me invitas a tu casa a comer no te voy a decir a quién tienes que llamar. Yo no comparto el formato, porque ya he comentado en múltiples ocasiones que el 90% del impacto, esto es como si se cae una bomba, los que estamos más cerca somos nosotros. Gracias a Dios no ha sido una bomba, ha sido una buena noticia que esperemos que se vea reforzada, pero el que tiene la inmensa mayoría de sus vecinos trabajando en Gibraltar, el que tiene a las empresas prestando servicios en Gibraltar, y no quiero con esto faltar el respeto a nadie, pero es que es la realidad, y espero que a partir de aquí también se puedan arbitrar otras cuestiones que para nosotros serían muy interesantes. Ya he comentado una nada más, tenemos un estadio recién construido precioso, aquí se están jugando competiciones europeas, tanto la selección como clubes, los que tienen que ir hasta Faro.
Y no es la primera vez que usted ofrece ese estadio.
Es que para nosotros sería una fuente de riqueza, de que viniera aquí la federación, de que hubiera ambiente futbolero en la ciudad, que tú sabes que la línea nos gusta mucho. Estoy seguro que se iba a recibir como en casa. Y yo creo que para el vecino de Gibraltar, que mejor. Viene la línea, voy hasta Portugal.
Señor alcalde, nos queda poquito tiempo, una pregunta muy rapidita. ¿La reunión con Fabián Picardo, para cuándo?
Pues tengo primero con mi ministerio, que me debo el Gobierno de España, y prácticamente tal y como salga, estoy intentando cerrar reuniones. También entiendo que su agenda es de loco. Yo creo que ha estado más tiempo en Londres que en Gibraltar en estos últimos meses, y esperemos que ya pues podamos centrarnos a trabajar, y evidentemente de la mano.
Y del dicho de hecho hay un trecho, ¿confiado de que se va a firmar?
Pero que sí, y que se publique en el Boletín Oficial del Estado, que es el periódico que me gusta leer. Ahí es donde viene la noticia importante.
Juan Franco, muchas gracias.
A vosotros.
There you have it, the Mayor of La Línea, Juan Franco, celebrating the announcement today, cautious as well. That needs to be signed. A lot of work needs to be done in the coming days. La Línea needs to be heard, and things need to be checked to make sure La Línea is also accounted for, he says. Ros, a lot of work ahead for La Línea and Gibraltar.
Kevin, thank you very much. Juan Franco, also thank you very much for speaking to us. We're heading over to London now. The European Affairs Committee of the House of Lords, chaired by Lord Ricketts, plays a scrutiny and oversight role in relation to treaty negotiations between the UK and the EU. While the committee doesn't participate directly in the negotiations, it does have an important constitutional and procedural function. So joining me live from Westminster very patiently, thank you very much, Lord Ricketts, for joining me. Can I ask you, first of all, what exactly is your role?
Well, thank you very much from Westminster this evening. This is clearly a very important day for Gibraltar after a long period of negotiation. Now that the political deal is done, as you know, the first thing has to be to turn it into a treaty, and then for it to go to the Gibraltar Parliament. When it's done that, assuming they've accepted it, it then comes to Westminster, and our process here is that the government has to lay a treaty in front of the British Parliament for 21 sitting days. So given that we usually sit about 4 days a week, that's about 5 weeks in which the parliamentary committees have time to look at the treaty, to scrutinise it, to ask questions of the government, to debate it, and then at the end of that period, then the treaty is ratified. So it's an important role of scrutiny and oversight, and it will fall to my committee in the House of Lords to take that on.
We saw Sir Bill Cash, who chairs the European Scrutiny Committee, raise some concerns, notably about Brits travelling to Gibraltar and whether they would need to show their documentation to the Schengen officials. So there were concerns raised about that. How do you deal with concerns that might be raised on the detail of this agreement, which we have yet to see, but obviously which will be handed over to you as soon as it's ready? How do you deal with those concerns?
Well, it's an opportunity for parliamentarians to put those sort of questions to ministers and to hear what they have to say. So yes, I've no doubt some members of my committee, some members when it goes to the floor of the House of Lords will have questions about all that, and the minister will have to answer them and satisfy the committee. For me, it reminds me rather of what British people do when they go to the station to get on Eurostar to go to France. They go through British controls and they go through French controls because they're going into the Schengen area. So I think those are the kind of analogies the Minister will make, but it'll be up to our committee to look at that, to think whether we're convinced by it, and then make a recommendation to the House of Lords, which will no doubt have a debate on it. So these things will be flushed out. I'm sure the government have good answers for all these questions, which, as you say, are well known. Sir Bill Cash and others have been raising them, and they'll be prepared for that. But that's the process. So objections are heard, they're weighed, and then Parliament, recognises what's been achieved, and the committee then, puts its recommendations to the full House, and there's a debate there. All that to be done within about 5 weeks, by which time then the treaty is formally ratified.
And will there be a vote on it?
I don't know. I mean, that depends really whether anybody wants to hold a vote. There could be a vote in the committee to get a recommendation to the House, and then it's up to the House of Lords whether to do that or not. I mean, we've rarely had treaties like this under this new constitutional procedure, which has only been in force for a few years. So I don't know whether there'll be a vote. I suppose it's possible.
Lord Ricketts, thank you so much for joining us and explaining that to us, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to speak to you again in the coming months. Thank you very much. Now, we're still going to get some more reactions. First of all, news just in. We have the congratulations of the Prime Minister to the Chief Minister on the UK-EU agreement. I'm going to read you this press release from number 6 Convent Place. The Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, was delighted to speak to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, this afternoon, shortly after the announcement of a UK-EU Gibraltar trade and mobility agreement in Brussels this afternoon. The Prime Minister congratulated Mr Picardo on the conclusion of the agreement and conveyed his satisfaction that the agreement is one that can be welcomed by all parties: the UK, the European Union, Spain and Gibraltar. Mr Starmer agreed that this is a brilliant step forward for Gibraltar that will lead to great opportunities for future economic development. At the time of the call, the Chief Minister was on a flight to the United Kingdom with the Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the Deputy Chief Minister Dr Joseph Garcia on the first leg of his return to Gibraltar from Brussels. So very, very enthusiastic congratulations there from Sir Keir Starmer. Clearly, his government is the one that has wrapped up this deal, even though it was started under the Conservative government, but very happy with the conclusion of the deal. Now, another person who is happy with the conclusion, well, the fact that there is going to be an agreement and a mobility agreement and a trade agreement, is one of Gibraltar's biggest developers, Greg Butcher. I spoke to him last night at the Federation of Small Businesses, and this is what he had to say about how he saw the sector growing and prospering in light of a treaty deal.
Of course, we have businesses here in Gibraltar, but through the UK, we also invest into Spain. So I see it through the UK eyes as they're building hundreds and hundreds of apartments and resorts down the coast. In fact, I think they're building about 1,000. Now, what I do see from talking to the UK side of our business is that they have much lower cost. So in Gibraltar, we're approximately 60% higher, even though we build similar property. So we may be using the same materials, but our costs are much higher. So if there was no frontier, I would expect the cost of building to fall substantially in Gibraltar. In fact, we have to ask ourselves, why does it cost so much here? The other thing is, I think the market will bifurcate. So what people don't understand, and I should add that this happened with Singapore and Johor Bahru, it happened with Hong Kong and Guangzhou, it happens in Monaco and the surrounding areas, is that where there's a tax advantage, the rich go. So prices that are at the top end rise, but prices at the bottom end fall. And the reason is that there is no cost advantage in terms of tax saving to be in Gibraltar if you are earning perhaps £45,000. You could be in Spain and paying the same tax. And you can get a much bigger home with more amenities in Spain. So therefore, I would expect the studio market, I'm afraid, to do particularly badly, and smaller homes, as people will simply go and live 10 minutes away, 18 minutes away. Alcadesa is 18 minutes away. If there's no border, you would just drive in from there and you'd get twice the home you would here. Therefore, you'll have, as I say, a bifurcated market. Now, this is normal. It's exactly what has happened in similar situations around the world.
Does that have a knock-on effect on other areas of the economy? So, for example, if construction becomes cheaper, house prices will go down. What would happen to salaries? I mean, do you foresee in the future an equalization of cost of living, for example?
Well, what should happen is building prices should go down, land prices should fall, but not for the special homes. So if you've got unique homes or a unique view or something that is that let's say the Hinwis would want to go for, those prices will go up. So you will have this bifurcation, effectively a complete divergence. But the homes, let's say, I'm sorry, in secondary and tertiary locations, those homes will have to compete with Spain, and they won't be able to. So therefore, they will have to be lowered in price.
So you're talking about the average Gibraltarian family on an average salary?
Then what should happen is house prices should fall, and that should be good news for them. That is, if you want to buy a home. So house prices at the lower end should go down. They have to equalise because there's no border. So therefore, if you, for example, the capital market in Gibraltar at the lower end is held up by the rental market. So if you take a simple example now, a studio will often cost £1,450 to £1,500. If you went to, and I know this is a real life example, you went to Alcadesa for €1,000, you could get a 2-bedroom home there. Therefore, the studio, in order to be competitive, needs to fall to something like £800. Now that suggests if the rental falls by almost half, then the capital value fall by almost half. So it will fall from something like 330, 350 to nearer 180. That would be a substantial move, but it would be good news if you're trying to buy a home in Gibraltar. It would be good news if you want a 1-bedroom home in Gibraltar, because now you have, when the border goes, you'll have competition from Spain. So Gibraltar homes will have to compete.
But in terms of business, let's put housing aside for a moment, but in terms of business, how do businesses compete with such a huge economy where they operate at much lower costs than they do over here? How does Gibraltar maintain its competitive edge?
It goes to the areas it's special in. So we have, as you know, a very strong gaming market, a very strong reinsurance market here. Now those actually will be enhanced because if you have no border, you're equally going to get likely the airport will open up. Having more airlines flying to more places makes it very much a better commercial jurisdiction. Therefore, you get more firms relocating here. So what we will do is we'll do what we're good at. We'll do more of that. And we're world leaders in certain areas. I mean, remember, much of the World Trade Center is occupied with tech firms. They are now 80% tech. So as we get stronger and stronger into tech, those areas where we hold an advantage in tech, they will flood here, I would hope. That in itself will create demand. Now, some of those people will live in Spain, and that's fine, because with no border, you'd be able to do that.
So you think that there is a certain amount of readjustment to be done, but essentially a very, very positive thing for Gibraltar should this treaty come about?
Commercially, this is one where you grab it with both hands because you move forward. And yes, Gibraltar will succeed, and Gibraltar is very good and has this ability to adjust. I mean, it's done this for hundreds of years, and I'm sure it will continue to do it. And the whole concept here is you have to adjust to what's happening in the world. And look at Trump. Look what is happening in America. Look what the Chinese face. So adjustment and change are part of business now. But we have some real strengths. And those, if the border goes and if the airport opens up, those will grow strongly. Yes, there will be adjustment, but overall it will be better for Gibraltar.
So a very happy property developer there, Greg Butcher, very happy at the news. And of course, everyone has an opinion on this treaty agreement. Thank you very much for sending me lots of your questions. We will address them in the coming days and weeks. We'll be speaking to the Chief Minister as well. So we hope to get all your questions answered for you if we've not had them answered tonight. Now, the voice that perhaps really matters the most are those whose life will now be shaped by this new treaty, this new relationship between Gibraltar, Spain and the EU, and that is Gibraltar's youth. What do they think about it all? And we have two on the panel now representing the GSLP youth, Sam Marache, and the GSD youth, Matt Vaz-Celestia. Thank you both for joining me. You are Gibraltar's possibly political future, as well as obviously contributing to the economy in years to come. Can I get your views, Sam? What are your thoughts on today's announcement?
Evening, Ros. Well, I think we've run out of hyperboles to describe just how momentous this occasion is for Gibraltar. Overwhelmingly positive is the reaction that I've seen from my own peers. I know that the moment the treaty was announced, I have a WhatsApp group that just exploded with messages, young people, ecstatic at the possibility of a fluid relationship with our neighbouring country, with Spain, and the possibility of economic prosperity for Gibraltar going forward, which is something that is of crucial importance to Gibraltar. And of course, me personally, I place full trust in the Chief Minister and his team. They've been working extremely hard over the last few years. I mean, this is a team that's dedicated their lives to this agreement over the last few years, and they've brought back what we know now is a safe and secure deal as they promised. So very happy, and I'm sure young people are also extremely happy.
Matt Vaz, your thoughts?
I think today has been an incredibly important day in Gibraltar's modern history, you could say. I think it's been incredibly important because we've finally reached a position now where there is stability. I think that's incredibly important. I think young people needed that assurance. I think, sort of speaking to a lot of young people, I think they were worried, and I think they had grown quite tired that actually nothing was happening. I think it's understandable that we don't get much information, but I think that for young people doesn't help. I think it disillusions them a little bit. So I think it's amazing that we've got good news today, and I think we're all quite happy with what's been announced so far. But of course, we need to see the full text to then be able to, of course, go through it and really scrutinise it properly. So
it's been frustrating for everybody involved, not least the people who have actually been trying to negotiate this deal. But I want to ask you whether you have felt at times that perhaps your young voices have not been heard in the melee. I mean, we hear opinions from business leaders and leaders of unions and organisations or whatever. Do you feel, were you quite happy to let them carry this negotiation, or do you feel that perhaps at times you would like to have had more of a say?
Well, I think from our view, it's very difficult to say exactly what sort of say we would have had in something that has to be done under the guise of secrecy, and there has to be this confidential relationship between those negotiating.
Well, a wish list, what you would like.
Well, for us, I think there is sometimes a misconception that young Gibraltarians are perhaps more willing to give away concessions on sovereignty to see a fluid border or anything of that sort. And that is utter nonsense, because young Gibraltarians are as staunch in their support of British sovereignty over Gibraltar as anyone else in Gibraltar. And therefore, our view really is the same as any Gibraltarian in Gibraltar, which is that we wanted a safe and secure deal, and therefore our wish list would have been the same as any Gibraltarian looking for prosperity and security going forward in Gibraltar.
Matt Vaz, would you agree with that? Do you think that sovereignty is as important an issue to Gibraltar's youth as it is to the older generation?
I think just by way of experience, I think the older generation have seen a lot, have been through a lot, and I think naturally it's a part of them to think constantly about sovereignty. And I think I wrote an article recently in the Chronicle discussing young people and their position on sovereignty and how they think of it, how they see it. And I've always been a little bit worried, because I think it's something that is so incredibly important to us that they understand. I have always been sort of very big on understanding our political past, in being able, if you understand our political past, essentially, I think you understand the fight that so many people have had to go through for us to be and live the way that we do now. So
I think, yes, that is quite important. And in terms of your original question of involvement, I understand, and I do agree with Sam that I think it is quite difficult to have a big involvement. This is obviously a very technical agreement. We've seen how long it's taken. It's taken 5 years since the New Year's Eve framework. So I understand it's limiting and it's not easy, but I think that's where I think we as leaders of youth parties have a role to play there to at least get our voices heard and put our opinions across.
We heard Greg Butcher say that he would expect the studio flats and maybe one-bedroom apartments to lose value, let's say, because of the equalisation, perhaps, of prices that we might now start to see, particularly in the construction industry, because it's a lot more expensive to construct here than it is in Spain. Do you think young people will be more ready to move to Spain? I mean, properties are quite expensive here now, and you can just go across the frontier and not have to worry about showing your passports like we have in the past. Do you expect there to be a bit of an exodus of young people going to live in Spain?
Well, I'm not a property developer, so I can't really comment on the sort of things that Greg was commenting on. What I can say is that young people want to live in Gibraltar. That's clear. All my friends, everyone wants to live here. And to be honest, without trying to get too much into the party political side, the affordable housing that has been created, we've just seen Hassan's, those houses are absolutely incredible. You have young families that are starting there and they wouldn't move anywhere else and let alone cross the border into Spain. So my view, and this is something that we will encourage the party as long as we are in government to continue doing, is to construct more of that, of the 50-50 housing to the quality and level that we've already seen, so that future generations of Gibraltarians can continue to live here and don't take up moving outside of Gibraltar.
Matvey, what do you think?
I think moving to Spain is an incredibly big decision, a difficult one, because Gibraltar is such a unique place. I think we live a certain way here which you can't find anywhere else. I'm currently in university, and being in university makes you really understand and realise what we've got here. So I don't think we will have, and as you described, maybe an exodus of people moving to Spain. I understand why you may think that, because obviously an open border will make it much easier to commute and you have cheaper housing prices. But I think the bigger worry would have been in the result of a no deal. So obviously we have people who can go to university with the government grant, and from there I think a lot of people in a no deal scenario would have maybe decided to not have returned to Gibraltar, and we'd have seen much less young people living in Gibraltar. I think that was a big worry that I had. Up until today, of course.
I mean, Gibraltar's economic prosperity was at risk without a deal. I mean, did you, as a young student yourself, as someone who has graduated already and is studying as a lawyer, did you have real concerns about Gibraltar's, the grants for the undergraduate degrees? I mean, did you think that could potentially be impacted by a no-deal scenario?
Well, I think it was Gibraltar's economic prosperity as a whole. So we've all been clear that the preferred outcome was a safe and secure deal that would then bring economic prosperity to Gibraltar, as opposed to a no-deal scenario, which inevitably would have had some element of effect or negative effect on our economy. Am I worried about the grants? Well, it's very difficult to say, because I know that at the same time as all the treaty negotiations, Dr. Joseph Garcia's team has been working on no-deal preparations. And I think someone on GBC said it before earlier in the day. He said Gibraltar's like a cat. You drop them, you drop Gibraltar, and it lands
on his feet.
Exactly, it lands on its four legs. And I think that Gibraltar, we would have done well anyway in the long run with a no-deal scenario. But certainly the preferred outcome and the preferred outcome for Gibraltar, for young people, for grants, for economic prosperity is the deal, and that seems to be on the way. And the Chief Minister and his team should be congratulated for securing that.
What opportunities, Matvey, do you see now with the open border, Gibraltarians taking advantage of what the country has to offer, as well as vice versa, but in terms of business, not just hospitality?
I think importantly for Gibraltar, we're in a position now where I think a lot of people are going to university and they're getting degrees in more technical stuff. So I think we can have, we'll see much more people now being employed, because what this deal allows us essentially to do is to people to trust investing in Gibraltar again, opening businesses, etc. And I think that will really help people come back to Gibraltar and find not only a job but a career. I think that's incredibly important for them, and I'm sure, having spoken to a lot of people, that was one of their big worries. No, in a scenario where there is no deal, we would have been in a position where a lot of people would have chosen to, let's say, remain in the UK, because It would have been much easier for them to work in their preferred profession.
Yeah, important to point out, this isn't freedom of movement, this is mobility. So it doesn't give us the right to work in the Schengen area, but to move in the Schengen area. So going forward, what would you like to see happen? How would you like to see things develop over the next few years?
Well, for me, obviously, and everyone else who's heard the news today and was excited about the news, we'd like to see the text of the treaty eventually concluded in a reasonable time, which the Chief Minister will no doubt be working towards probably as we speak now. And then for Gibraltar just to grow economically and for our red lines on sovereignty, jurisdiction and control to remain uncrossed as they have today, so that future generations of Gibraltarians can continue living the sorts of lives that we've been living, and at the same time also benefit from something that was almost jeopardized completely by the Brexit vote several years ago.
Do you see a period of adjustment, though? It's not going to be a quick fix immediately. Things are going to be prosperous.
I think that's like with everything that Gibraltar's been through in the past. There's always going to be a period where we need to get used to it, and we need to accept changes, which obviously some people won't like. But I think it's very important that we get used to it, and I think what Gibraltar's history has shown that we always overcome every hurdle that comes our way. So I think that's something very, very important.
It is really refreshing to hear from two such bright, politically engaged members of our community. Thank you so much for joining us with your thoughts, Matt Veselicia and Sam Marache. And I hope that we'll have you back when we have the text and we have a bit more detail and a bit more meat on the bone.
More of a debate then.
We can talk more then, but thank you very much for coming in. Well, it's been an extraordinary day, a day to remember, a day that will go down in history. Let's just recap now on how the events of today have unfolded.
You have a message for the people of Gibraltar today?
I'm looking forward to a very good meeting.
Do you have a treaty ready?
Can get to a negotiation deal that is good for the businesses and the people of Gibraltar.
Big smiles on the faces of both Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Chief Minister Fabian Picardo as they shook hands out on the tarmac before boarding that UK government plane you see behind me, which is destined for Brussels.
There's optimism and hope that this time could be different.
We bring you breaking news. An agreement has been reached between the UK and the EU on the future relationship of Gibraltar.
We all recognize a clear momentum and agreed that the time had come to get the job done.
Este acuerdo marca un antes y un después para la estabilidad, la cooperación y el bienestar, creando una zona de prosperidad compartida.
Well, I'm delighted that today we have reached a historic solution that I believe gives the people of Gibraltar the certainty they need for their sovereignty and their prosperity.
We have reached the agreement we needed to reach. We are part of the continent of Europe. We need to have the fluidity of goods and people. It opens up a huge opportunity for the future of Gibraltar and the whole region, and to look forward to a positive relationship with Spain. The hugely important aspect to this is not just the business aspect, it's the human aspect.
Yep, definitely been an extraordinary day, and the person who has coordinated all our coverage is sitting right next to me. It is our CEO, but also our editor-in-chief, who got the chance to tread the boards again today. James, how challenging has it been? Because we haven't known if there's a deal or no deal. We've been on standby for weeks. How challenging has it been?
Gosh, what a day. And I don't know where to say good morning, good evening, good night. It feels, I was watching that Lamy clip that you mentioned, going back on the road. It feels like it was 2 days ago. I mean, so much has happened in a single day. And as you know, this is one of those stories which is extremely fast moving. I think, because of my background in news, I think we could perhaps put some of that to use. I mean, one of the things that we were very clear that as a public service broadcaster, we had a huge role to play today. So you can see that we were ready with our branding, we were ready to go with all our special programs. Credit to the staff who've changed an entire day of programming and an entire evening of scheduling. I mean, that's a hard task. And it's like, this program has been brilliant. The news special has been brilliant. Our Gibraltar today at lunchtime, the live press conferences. Well, we couldn't take them live because it wasn't allowed. But we did take them as live. So there's so much happening. And I think it's just one of those, as professionals, it's an exciting day. You never quite know what's going to happen. And when you see the tension and you talk about tension, you can just think, gosh, what must it have been like for the politicians?
Yeah, we've been in our newsroom bubble a little bit today. Have you been able to gauge the community, what's been
No.
said? No? We'll go
just
home tonight and have a look at our
I've got so many
news
messages.
feeds.
It's in fact, I don't think I've read a single press release in its entirety. I haven't had the time. I think my role has been more coordinating and looking at stuff and, of course, trying to push some of the lines. But we need to sit down. And there are a lot of questions. I think that's one of the things our journalists were asking. And our coverage continues tomorrow. You're going to have the Chief Minister on this same set tomorrow. The Chief Minister has agreed to come on and answer the questions of the people of Gibraltar. We want to take the time to explain and to give the Chief Minister that time and that opportunity to address concerns, but also to ask him about the many questions which now start to emerge.
I've had actually quite a lot of questions that have come in tonight, and they are questions that I knew really do need to be put to the Chief Minister, and I've got them there, and those, along with whatever else comes in tomorrow, viewpoint@gbc.gi, I will put to the Chief Minister, as you say. So that's very good. We can get a little bit more clarity perhaps tomorrow. But in terms of our coverage, James, what happens next?
So tomorrow morning between 8 and 9, there's going to be a news hour. Again, a bit of focus, trying to make sense of all the news behind the headlines. So much has happened throughout the course of today that we're going to sort of pause again for an hour tomorrow morning, bring you a summary of all the interviews, the great speakers that we've had across the day with all those reactions. Ian Clarence and Claire Hernandez will be hosting that. Not quite sure what's happening with Gibraltar today yet. Tomorrow at 1, we will decide
London,
that during the course of the morning,
Gibraltar.
depending where our teams are. And you asked me earlier about deploying. I think, when you look at a small station, there's probably no regional or small community TV station that has live programs from Brussels, London, Spain, Gibraltar. It's a mammoth engineering task. It's a mammoth production task. It's just credit to the entire GBC team, because I think one of these things is that we've delivered this as a team, and I think that's what you're always proud as, chief executive. You want your team to rally together. And one of the things that I was seeing throughout the day today was people coming in and saying, I have some free capacity now for half an hour. What can I do? Even if it were people working across departments. But I'm extremely pleased, and I hope that the community is pleased that we've been there every step of the way today. And in fact, over the past so many months.
Yeah, it's great if they don't realise at all what's going on behind the scenes, because then that means that they can just relax and see the output and hopefully not see any of the ducks paddling.
You know what?
Underneath.
You're so spot on. I remember when I was a budding journalist, just starting off, and I always used to say, to one of my editors at the time, it's like, what happens? People don't really understand the hard work that you have to put on for a 3-minute report, for example. That a 3-minute report is not 3 minutes work. It's probably a whole day's work. And they said, and neither should they.
Absolutely.
And that's the beauty of
And
it.
before I let you go, just a quick word on your doorstep of David Lammy, the foreign minister, no less. How did it feel going back on the road like that?
You know what? It was so early this morning. I was up at 5:30 this morning. I was there at 7. They were cleaning the guns. There had been so much speculation last night. And there's a lot that we knew that we thought, let's wait until the morning. Let's see what happens. We weren't quite sure that he was crossing to see the Chief Minister, but then the Cabinet Ministers started to arrive. And I remember, and this is what I think gave us the first real sense that we were on the cusp of a deal. The Foreign Office officials were there. They all came out. And that's when you think, I'm going to get moved on. And he didn't want to say much, but you notice that he does stop. And I think what I found really interesting as well is you'll realise that the first question wasn't anything about the treaty. I think I used, what's your message to the people of Gibraltar today? And I think that almost forced him to stop. Because then...
You thought, I can answer that question.
Well, and also, if you're going to announce a treaty later on in the afternoon, how could you not have had a message for the people of Gibraltar so early in the morning?
Yeah.
But yeah, I love being a journalist as well, but I've also loved the production, the crafting of our extended coverage today, because I truly and honestly think it's been phenomenal, and a huge round of applause to the entire team.
James Nish, thank you very much for joining us. And as you mentioned there, I will be joined live by the Chief Minister, with the Chief Minister tomorrow night on Viewpoint. I don't know if it's extended or whether it's an hour.
We're going to schedule 60 minutes for now, and then we'll see how it goes.
OK, so do send your questions, viewpoint@gbc.gi, and I will put them to the Chief Minister, and hopefully he can clarify all those questions that we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back with full coverage of the events tomorrow. Thank you very much.